There we go.
Thank you.
May drop the screen a bit, tune us up. There we go. I could just see the part in your hair and that was it.
That's all you need to know.
All right, guys, let's get going. I call this meeting to order. The agenda for 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, October 28, 2020. Town of Quality Beach regular council meeting held virtually, of course. I'd like to recognize the fact that we are holding this meeting on the lands of the Coast Salish people. Adoption of the agenda.
Move.
Seconded. All in favor?
Actually,
Councillor Walker.
thank you. I was hoping, and I'll request some clarity on this. I was hoping to refer one of the letters to an in-camera portion of this meeting at the end. I'm just looking for feedback if you think that would be appropriate.
That would depend on timing. One of the letters to an in-camera session at the end. Could it wait till the next in-camera?
There's a grant application that a local group is hoping to apply for tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. and a resolution of council will be required for that to proceed.
I'm assuming you're referring to St. Andrews.
Nope, referring to the community queues, the application for the agricultural project.
Okay, just for clarification, staff, would that require a reconsideration before I say yes, no, or anything different? I'll let Heather or Daniel chime in on that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting the letter. So you're speaking of the letter on page 43 of the package?
Yes.
So I guess it depends without getting, obviously can't get into the in-camera portion of what you're asking, but it's what proposal they're considering specifically and whether it's involving town land, which then is in camera.
So they're requesting access to 5 acres of town land. So I figured that would be appropriate to discuss in an in-camera format, but we are quite tight for time.
We are, and I think this is something I would consider that we've already dealt with, but I would say that's probably not a good thing. I'll turn to council for their thoughts. I think this is something that we've already talked about. Let's do it at the end of the meeting in camera, because I think that's where we should do it. But,
So move to amend the agenda to add an in-camera portion to, if required.
Second.
discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
And Mayor Weiss? There was also a motion that came through from Councillor Harrison that I think is worthy of discussion during this meeting, if is deemed appropriate.
I believe there's a couple of notices of motion coming up, which I would like to leave it as notices of motion at this point in time. We had ample time to get them on the agenda. We did. I think we should follow our own rules and put those as notices of motion. We'll discuss at the next meeting if that's okay. Adoption of the agenda as amended. Secondary. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Adoption of the consent agenda.
Move to adoption of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Secondary.
Mayor Weiss,
Councillor Felmer.
there is one thing I'd like to pull out of the consent agenda.
Go ahead. What is that?
That is going to be number 3.
So B3.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sorry, just for clarity, there's 2 number 3s.
Oh, so yeah, we should actually work on numbering these a little different.
We will. So is it from the motion number 3 from October 21st or October 14th?
Oh, sorry, it's going to be number 3 from October 14th.
Thank you.
Thank you. That helps me as well. I had circled the wrong one.
Yeah, I didn't see that either.
Any other things to remove from that agenda, gentlemen? Seeing none, all those in favor of the adoption of the consent agenda other than B3 of October 14th?
Do we debate this?
Well, I think we should get a motion first and seconded, then we can probably. We've removed
that's-
one off the consent agenda.
That's how it works.
So we're moving
Anyone
the,
can remove some. Consent agendas are a little bit different, guys. Anyone can remove something that's required from that agenda, and that's what Councillor Filmer just did. So he's removed that. We'll discuss it after we pass the consent agenda. So at this point in time, I'm asking for adoption of the consent agenda with B3 October 14th removed. That'll be seconded. Then we can have a discussion.
Yeah.
Then Councillor West.
No, that's right. We approved the rest and debate that one separately.
That's correct. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion. Councillor Walker.
thank you. Yeah, just a discussion in general. I just wanted to commend our finance staff for putting together the financial report with the projections for the end of the year. I think that's incredibly valuable as not only through COVID, but also as we just evaluate our budget on a regular basis. So it's appreciated.
Thank you. All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. B3, Councillor Filmer.
Yes, thank you, Aries. I think this one's going to be a tricky one for all of us. I've got some issues with this one, with the relocation or demolition of St. Andrew's Lodge. Been talking to lots of residents lately, as well. I'm sure many council members have been getting emails and phone calls about St. Andrew's Lodge. I honestly feel that we made a mistake on this one. I really do. I think it includes not only a public debate, but a reconsideration. I think this one, we decided in camera with something that personally I don't feel should have been decided in camera. So with that, with what I'm going to try to do here, I would like to try to move reconsideration of that motion.
Did you vote against this?
You can't, sorry, before you get further, you can't reconsider this motion. It has to be done on the next day or the same day. You would have to rescind the motion, which is debatable, needs a mover and seconder, but it would require 2/3 majority to do that consideration.
You understand that, Councillor Filmer?
Okay, if we have to do it that way, then I move to rescind.
Seconder.
I'll second that for debate.
Councillor Walker, second. Discussion. Councillor Walker, Councillor.
Thank you, Maurice. I'm not sure rescinding this makes sense. What I think makes sense is there's a grant application that we can get through to end of day tomorrow. If we can get that in, I think it makes sense to defer these motions until that grant comes back. We can apply for up to $2 million. There's two separate streams. And so I think having a deferral of these motions, because there's I think 3 of them that are sort of associated with the same. I think deferring those 3 and then also directing staff to apply for the grants with the support of Q's, I think will be able to be done within the timeline with minimal staff involvement. And if we don't get the grants, then this can proceed.
Councillor Harrison.
So yeah, so the grant Councillor Walker is referring to is a heritage grant. The problem, though, is that it does specify as one of the prerequisites. It's for economic recovery. It's not for cultural preservation. And there is a requirement for the heritage portion of that grant that there is a permanent employment that's created as a result in the cultural sector. I'm not sure that's really a municipal lane. I think that what you're going to find through this is going to be similar to the first round of Investing in Canada funding, where about 3/4 of the allotments were for First Nations. I think you're going to see a lot of First Nation cultural infrastructure being funded for this. I don't think it has the same strict requirements as the Investing in Canada. So for our initial decision, they're looking for grants through what's called the Investing in Canada program. That's the big infrastructure program through the federal government that the provincial government administers through municipal affairs and housing. And there were a lot of documents which needed to be included, which weren't included. So you need to have a detailed cost estimate. There was no detailed cost estimate. You need to have a detailed plan. There was no detailed plans. You need to have wheelchair level accessibility for people with wheelchairs, highest level accessibility. That wasn't included in the documents. So I think the initial decision does make sense given what they stated and what was involved, even though we did technically pass the timelines. Even if the timelines were different, it would still be the right decision because there are a lot of factors that weren't there. I think for the deadline of tomorrow for the Heritage Grant, just because it talks about creating permanent employment in the heritage sector, I'm not certain what's being proposed here actually meets the terms of that grant. I think also too, it'd be very difficult to ensure we actually get the grant in on time, seeing as the deadline is midnight tomorrow. It's a bit difficult to have less than a day to get that done.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Those are very good points, and they're entirely accurate. So I appreciate that. There are two streams. One is the destination development, which does work with the site grounds itself, and then there's the other, which is the unique heritage infrastructure stream. So both I think are worth applying for. I think that, I mean, we see the emails coming in this morning through feedback of this this heritage removal or whatever we're going to call this. So there is community appetite for this. The Society of Queues has already done much of the legwork as far as writing the grant, and so if they can put that together on timeline and get that in, I don't see a significant risk for the town. If we don't get approved for these grants, then that's a different conversation. Then we don't have funds to do the restoration of the St. Andrew's Lodge building. And if somebody in the community wants to raise those funds, that's a different conversation, but we haven't seen any applications for that. So I'm not sure how to formulate a motion, but I think it would make sense to do what we discussed previously, which was to defer these connected motions and then apply for these grants.
So first, procedurally, we would need to go ahead with the motion to rescind, and then I believe would need a 2/3 majority to actually rescind. Before we could, I think, entertain any motions to revisit aspects of that. So the other thing for me, I don't feel comfortable moving forward in that direction without an understanding of the long-term logistical costs. I mean, operational costs rather, of maintaining the building. So how much does it cost per year to maintain? And I know I talked to my dad briefly because he was on the Qualicum Beach Museum board, and there's a lot of money involved with keeping the museum going. It is a bit of an expensive building. Now, granted, we were planning to get the building up to code, which is a lot of money. But once it's up to code, it's more of a residential building than the old power station, so it's a little bit different as a building. But there would be ongoing costs. So Valhalla might be an appropriate analogous building. So without information on how much money you're spending every year, long couple days, I'd feel uncomfortable moving forward when we're not taking on additional costs in the long term and we're not sure how much those costs are.
Thank you, Mayor. Didn't we passed a motion, and my question to staff is, has that been actioned? Because it's very awkward once you give direction to staff and they take action, is then to reconsider it, which is actually against the policy once it's been acted on. I'd just like to ask staff, did staff act on that motion that we passed on October 14? Thank you.
I can answer that one, Your Worship.
Can you speak up a little bit, please, Daniel?
Yeah, I can answer that one, Your Worship.
Please do. Thank you.
So the motion has been actioned, and our operations staff, I believe, have issued a contract with Parksville Heavy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My confusion with reconsideration and rescind were a little bit different. So I wasn't sure what the requirements were. So motion to rescind is difficult once we've already actioned it. But Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I just, at the end of the day, we made a decision to get rid of a heritage building in camera. We decided to let staff go ahead without having to come back to us with a contract or a company or an agreement or anything. We directed staff to just go ahead and either get rid of, at the end of the day, to get rid of this building without telling the public that that's the route that we're wanting to go. We let the public know that we're going to come up with a plan, whether it's demolish, relocate, or use, and then we're going to go back to them and let them know this is what we've decided. Instead, what has happened is we have decided in camera that we're going to get rid of this building. And then they see it on an agenda that it's been done. And now they're hearing a week later that it's been actioned. Mrs. Little was the first town freeman Qualicum Beach ever had. You know, huge business in town, huge tourism business in town, and just an all-around really good citizen in town. And here we are getting rid of everything. And the only thing that's going to be left of this park to remember Mrs. Little is her name. Nothing else. Now, personally to me, being born and raised here, history is really important, and it's obviously really important to a lot of people. I don't know if council has looked through the emails lately today, but a lot of the emails that have been coming in are not from residents that we normally hear from. You know, there's a lot of names in there that I did not recognize, and those are residents that we're not hearing from. We made a decision in camera that realistically should not have been in camera. We went against what we're going to tell the public we were going to do. And here we are now, luckily debating something in public, but it's, you know, at the end of the day, there's no point because it's, in my eyes, been rammed through. We did it in camera. We got staff to action as fast as possible without having to come back to us. When we had a report come forward to show us what it was going to cost, I believe there was somewhere around $600,000 of what it was going to cost if we as a municipality were going to hold the building under our own banner. When one member of council asked staff, what does this number mean? Can you break down this number? Staff were not able to break down that number. And it was, in my eyes, they were not adequate responses and were not adequate answers from the staff to us as a council. We had inadequate answers. The report did not outline exactly what that cost was going to be to keep the building. It went in camera and here we are now. So I just don't know how council can feel comfortable going ahead with this type of decision when we told the public one thing and now we're doing a separate. You know, I'm really confused.
I really need to speak to this because I think a lot of things you're saying are actually bending the truth just to a certain degree. We went through an RFP process, which we told the public we were going to do after a fairly lengthy public consultation of what they wanted to see there. And then we went through an RFP process. We got two choices through that. One pulled out because they didn't want to come up with what that was. The second one was incomplete. So that left us zero options moving forward other than what we're doing. So I think what we were doing is exactly what we said we're going to do. Councillor Harris.
I would also point out too that there was a report with detailed cost breakdowns. Staff might not have been able to accurately remember every aspect of it in the moment of a debate, but we have been presented in a previous council meeting with a very detailed breakdown of the, I think it was roughly $700,000 cost to restore the building up to code. So that is something we have. It's either 600,000 or 700,000. It's been a while since I looked at that agenda, but it's in that range. So that is something we do have, and it was a relatively detailed breakdown of everything. Secondly, when you look at the existing public consultation, I mean, yes, we're getting flooded with emails today from a no reply at certain websites. So that's interesting that people don't want us to be able to respond clearly. But that was also too, you have to think of the Lanark process, which had, I believe, about 400 people participate in it. And in that process, there was two steps regarding the lodge building. The first step was, do you want to retain the lodge building just as an idea? And I think there was a majority of support for that. And then the follow-up question on the second time was, if there is a significant cost associated with retaining the lodge building, do you support retaining the lodge building? And 59% of people said no. So we right now are in a position where there isn't clarity about grant funding, and we could debate potentially at some other time the options which are available. But for what we received from QBQs, they were looking only at the Investing in Canada program, and that was not an eligible grant for several reasons. So I think that to state that the process is wrong is maybe a little bit misleading. It's somewhat fast, to your point. I think that's fair to say. But given the fact that we didn't really have any other viable options, no one's come forward and said, we want to refurbish the building on private property. We're willing to do that. And the only real application we got, unfortunately, didn't have the required documentation to really advance it, unless we want to hire someone and a contractor to fill in the missing information, which would cost a lot of money and time. I think it's reasonable to action it. I'd also point out too, that if we have an existing contract that's been signed, to rescind the motion could put us in breach of contract law, and we'd want to actually discuss this further in camera. So I'd say we defer this conversation till the in-camera portion of the meeting.
Councillor Walker.
So
think
maybe
what-
through the chair to staff to get an opinion on that.
Do I have the
motion to
floor?
rescind is on. And we should finish the conversation, gentlemen. Councillor Walker.
My concern with referring this to in camera is I think that was sort of one of the problems that's created some of this angst, is that there was a decision to remove a building and to not work with a group and to work with another group that was all done in camera. And some of that conversation people were expecting to be able to partake in. The building's still there. So if there's a contract that's been entered into, it hasn't been executed. As far as I know, the building's still there. I mean, maybe somebody should have a little look. But there's still time to save this building, but not only save this building, but also to invest in this entire park at once. Applying for this grant, if it takes a couple hours of staff time, I know of at least 3 volunteers who are willing to stay up all of tonight and as much time as required tomorrow to write a grant application for this. And that's up to $2 million. If we don't get the grant, then we're out some staff time. But if we do get it, we can get this whole park all done at once. And I see that as a tremendous opportunity to bring in the First Nations history of this property, to bring in the cultural history with Little Family. And I don't know why there's pushback from some members of council to just consider that for one day. All we're asking for is a one-day reprieve and likely 2, maybe 3 weeks to hear back on this grant. So it's to me, it seems a minimal investment in time and money.
Councillor Harris.
Sorry.
Councillor Harrison.
Just for a point of clarity, you don't need to complete a contract to be able to breach a contract. Once you've signed the contract and that relationship exists, then when you pull out after you've signed it, you could be in breach. So I just want to highlight that. That is actually something we need to be careful of.
I think one more thing I'm going to speak to, and then let Councillor Walker, like I usually do, go last, and then I'll call the question. But I think I believe it 2.5 years ago we bought this property to make into a park. So this is taking a long time to get done. So ramming it through, I resent the comment that we were ramming it through. I think this has been going on a long time. We did public outreach. We talked to people. We've given people opportunity to move forward and say, you know, I like that building, I want to move it, or I like that building, I want to do something with it. Nothing's panned out. And we're still, what we're looking to do now is delay it even longer when it's time to get moving on, you know, the vision of the park that we took to the public a year ago. I understand the attachment. You know, when I saw the ad in the paper this morning, it looks really nice, this beautiful little cottage on the ocean. I guarantee you the real building doesn't look near that nice. It's going to be a lot of work. Then, you know, the other part of the cost is everything we've done with new builds on the water. We've asked them to raise it up upwards of 2 meters. I believe we'd have to do the same here if we're doing that. So this cost of $600,000 to $700,000 for the building is going to double once we have to raise that. I think it's, you know, in consideration of the fiscal pocketbook, I think this is the right thing to do. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess working backwards on that, the 2-meter height increase we saw from a private property owner in Judges Row that existing properties are exempted from the FCL. So that, while a concern for the long-term viability of this structure, is not really a concern right now. The other thing is the 2.5 years that we've been sitting on this. I'm excited about moving forward on this project too. I'd like to see that park done. But when we look at our 10-year plan, there is no real significant plan for investing in this park. So we've spent $3.4 million on this property. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on engagement and removing some of the structures from it. And there's no real significant plan to create any amenities there. So all it's going to represent is just another piece of land the town owns that may or may not be used by a lot of people. And then I guess last to Councillor Harrison with the contract, I guess also to staff. I mean, if we've entered into that contract, that is definitely a liability. Regardless of the value, we may still have to pay that out. But if the province is willing to invest $2 million into our community, that to me seems well worth the refunding of that contract amount. Through the chair to staff, if I could, though, the contract, the direction of council seemed to be an intention to preserve some of the materials from the site and recycle as best as possible. If the contract is entered into, I would like to know what is the amount of that contract, but also what efforts are being made to preserve some of these historical artifacts.
I don't believe that's a conversation we'll have in this room.
Why not?
A contract. Oh, Dan, you can clarify if you like, please.
Hey, Your Worship. The process that we followed was one where we first attempted to secure a contract with Nickel Brothers for the relocation. Nickel Brothers was not in a position to be able to confirm that they could meet the timelines for relocation, and it was all contingent on finding a buyer. And so with the resolution having the timeline of February 2021, that was not a viable option with no certainty. There were then 2 bids that were received to do the remedial work. The remedial work that is being done with Parksville Heavy, they are assuring that even though it is a deconstruction, they are committed to preserving those elements that, or looking to preserve those elements that they can, if people wanted to reuse parts of the lodge. So there again, as they disassemble it, there was a discussion at the time of, could we save a door? Could we save a window? Could there be aspects of it that are saved? And Parksville Heavy says that they can and will be integrating that into the work they do, and therefore had the best value contract. I don't have the exact number in front of me of the value, and I apologize, I wasn't prepared for this level of detail. But the contract is in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000, I believe.
Discussion. Councillor Phil.
So if I just want to get this correct, so we don't want to invest any money into preserving or protecting the building. And we've got a group that is ready to go ahead and at least try to get some grants, very high amount grants that could potentially take all financial burden away from the town, or most of the financial burden away from the town. And we didn't really discuss that part of it. We just dismissed that group with little discussion. And then now we're looking at spending $30,000 to $40,000 that really isn't in the budget to now get rid of the building. So we're looking at, so we don't want to do anything with the building. We don't want to put money into the building, but we're going to pay a fairly decent amount to get rid of the building when we did have a group that was ready to take the financial burden away. I just don't understand the process here.
Councillor Harrison, gentlemen, we have to wrap this thing up. So I'll give you all one more opportunity. We should move on.
So once again, for clarity's sake, the costs do not include operational costs. We have no report on operational costs. It would be unwise to move forward with preserving a building on the waterfront in a floodplain without a discussion of operational costs in the long term. We need to know the ongoing costs of maintaining that asset. We do not have that information. It is unlikely we will be able to produce that information within one day, schedule a council meeting, waiving notice, and then making a council decision. So I don't feel comfortable supporting something without information on the long-term operational costs, even if it's a ballpark figure. And it doesn't have to be precise, but it does need to be a general ballpark figure. We don't have that information. There's also requirements hardwired into $2 million. As I said before, you need to have job creation in the cultural sector. There's been no clear identification of any employment that be directly created through applying to those grants. Who will pay that staff's wages? Who will take care of benefits? Who do they work for? Or is it a private business? Now we start running into problems with the contract that we signed with the Little family when we purchased the property, because there are terms and conditions intrinsic to the purchase of the property. So I think there's a lot of moving parts, and to expect that all to work out in less than 24 hours is quite unreasonable. If this is something that maybe 5 months ago we had a discussion on, we could look at all the different moving pieces and get it worked out. We didn't have that conversation 5 months ago. We're having it the day before the grant expires. So I think it's a little bit unreasonable to say, oh, just fill it in and go with it, and the ongoing costs are the ongoing costs. Shrug your shoulders and move on. We do already have clear information from the citizens of Qualicum Beach. The majority who participated in the process were the most ardently invested in that property. The majority of them already said if there's significant costs with maintaining the building, we're not interested. And there will be significant costs here. So I think we've made a decision. Let's have the vote. If 2/3 majority says we should rescind the motion, knowing that there's potential legal expenses involved, then let's have that vote and it'll be what it's going to be.
Councillor Westbrook. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I'm really struggling with this. When the old schoolhouse was finished in its function as a school and as an administration building, it was going to be torn down. And somehow there was a fundraising started, Chamber of Commerce got involved, other groups got involved, and they saved the building. Cost us a lot of money to look after that building. I think a couple of years ago, we probably spent over $300,000 to fix the foundation. And a couple of years ago, and I was not excited about that either, but we wanted to fix up the old washrooms on the beach, right by the beach hut there. I think that was over $300,000. Renovating these old buildings is a very expensive habit, and I'm concerned with what Councillor Harrison was saying, that based on the information he had, which apparently is correct, that we'd have to hire people to work there. This is a restart of the economy type of thing. We're looking at the old building of the College Inn, which was a beautiful building at one time. Now it's probably done. And all these old buildings that we have, like the Valhalla, they're wonderful things to have, the museum, but they're very expensive. And they benefit to a large degree more than just the Qualicum Beach town, more than the residents of Qualicum Beach. They benefit areas far beyond our boundaries. But we pay the bill. Qualicum Beach taxpayers on the hook for this. And the other point that kind of helped me make the decision we did on October 14 was that the majority of the people who were involved in the outreach organized by Lanark felt that about 2/3, I think, said if it costs money, don't keep it. It's supposed to be a park. Let's enjoy it as a park. Yes, display the history like we're talking about in some of the following motions there that we've already approved. Then let's go ahead with that. So that's where and it's unfortunate that this didn't come to us sooner. But like Councillor Harrison said, we've been looking at proposals for a long time. And if this had come forward earlier, it might have been something that we could have worked with. But at this point, and looking at all the information that we have about that, and my experience with trying to retain old buildings for the benefit of the larger community is very hard on our tax dollars. Thank you.
Councillor Walker, and then I'll call the question.
Thank you. The thing I'm confused with this debate is I believe that the RFP was submitted to staff at the beginning of September. And so if there were any concerns by any member of council about potential operational costs, I don't know if there's been any communication between them and Q's or between staff and Q's regarding that, but there is a very well-developed plan for this property. I've met with a number of people from Q's and they've thought this through. As far as this benefiting people outside of our community who aren't paying for it, I can't see any better way than having the province of British Columbia invest $2 million into our community. I don't know how to the direct benefit of the people who live here. So yes, it's an old building. Yes, it's an expensive habit. But if we don't preserve the heritage in our community, we lose our identity. So I think it's worth doing. It's a very minimal time and an effort for us to potentially garner $2 million of 100% grant.
I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to go to Daniel on this one. Would this grant application that the Qs are looking for, would it be competing grants with our town grants for the turf field and the roundabout in any way?
Your worship, it's well, I can only make a guess on competing interests. I can say that with the 4 pockets that are there, the dialogue we've had with the province along those grants, and the grants fall under community economic resilience is one pocket, destination development is another pocket, unique heritage infrastructure is another pocket, rural economic recovery is the 4th pocket. So there are 4 pockets. This was provided to us in short notice as part of a stimulus. And the intent is, or the deadline is tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. We had identified 2 grants that we were applying for. And the reason for that is the province told us that we could not exceed 2 areas where applications are going in. So the town itself is submitting 2 applications. This doesn't prevent the opportunity for another not-for-profit in the community to make an application. And so if that community group wanted to make an application, they could. But I would venture to say that the province is not about to start handing out many grants just in Qualicum Beach. Some of these pockets, I believe each pocket is in the neighborhood of 19 to 20 million. And for the province, I stand to be corrected on that, but I think that my dialogue with the province or my recollection with them is accurate. And we were told to apply for a maximum of 2 for our area. So if I had a crystal ball, yeah, they do compete. I don't think we'll get everything we want. That's usually not the way it goes. It would be great if it does. I do not know and could not confirm whether it would directly compete with those larger infrastructure grants that we're also putting forward that included the turf field and the roundabout for the Village White Eagle Crest. So it's just a hypothetical.
Thank you, gentlemen. I understand this is a touchy subject, but we do have to move on, and I do appreciate the conversation. So on the motion to rescind, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion to rescind fails. Approval of the minutes. Council President. Councilor Harrison. Thank you. Seconder. Councilor Filmer. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, unanimous. Thank you. Business arising from the minutes. I'm not sure where this one came from. Anyone give me a hand on this one?
Okay.
Councilor Philip.
Thank you. These were on the agenda for September 16th. As I'm the liaison with the Heritage Forest Commission, I wasn't aware that these motions had been decided. Neither was the staff representative, I believe is Mr. Sales. That's also a staff rep with the commission. Neither of us were fully in the loop and up to date on what these motions were, so we deferred them to a future meeting. So hopefully Mr. Sales has had time. I've also had time, but hopefully Mr. Sales has had time and we can discuss these now.
Mr. Sales?
Certainly. So, yeah, I mean, there's no issue with the 2 motions that are proposed. Essentially, it's installing new signage and a commitment to collaborating with this group in the planting of new trees along Hemsworth Road. That's something that the town has been looking at before. So I don't see any conflict with existing town direction. So from staff's perspective, there's no reason not to proceed with these motions.
Very good. Councilor Filmer, you want to move A and B? Go ahead.
I'm not in favor of A, so I don't want to move it, but I do want to discuss it if it's going to be moved.
I'll move A
I'll second that.
for discussion.
Councilor Filmer.
Thank you. I just have one slight issue with this one is we have a lot of groups that come forward to us asking for signage in our different trail networks. And I understand that the Heritage Forest Commission is a different identity as a commission when we relate it to our committees, but it falls under our same trail network. And as a park, we have got a lot of groups that come forward and ask for different signage throughout our trails that we usually defer to either our budget conversations or something else. And I don't think this is anything different. I don't think we should treat this as a special interest group. I think this falls under the same thing. So I would like to defer this one to our budget conversations or to staff, because I know staff are working on signage for our different trail networks. And I think this one just needs to go in that same bucket. So that's why I'm not in favor of the motion as it stands.
Your Worship, may I speak?
Sorry, who's that?
This is Daniel, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I certainly support what Councillor Filmer is saying. There has been a lot of discussion around signage and branding. If council will recall, it was one of our failed attempts at grants for the rural development grant, where we were looking to work with the chamber and the museum to do wayfinding and new entryway signage around town. That grant did fail. That said, the chamber has moved forward and is now working with what was formerly known as our Downtown Business Association. And they are looking at a branding exercise and have issued a request for us to participate in that process. And the dialogue with the chamber right now is how it is that we could potentially look at funding elements of that over a number of years so that it is cost achievable. So it is certainly an appropriate budget discussion. So I just want to support what Councillor Filmer is saying, and also flag that it would be beneficial for us to perhaps start with a branding exercise where we have a format, a logo, a consistent look prior to then putting the content on new signs. If that's something that we could do with the chamber and the downtown business, it would lend itself to consistency across the entire community.
At this point in time, I think I will also speak against it. I think, Councilor Fillmore, of course, being very much involved, and staff looking for something that looks the same around town and we can have some consistency. I like that. So I'll be voting against this to side with Mr. Fillmore, because I think this are his motions. He should have something to do with that. So Councillor Walker, then I'll call the question.
It's easier to defer this to future discussions about signage. So I think that's a more appropriate thing than just shooting it down, because I wasn't present for what this was referred to us. But just a question through the chair to staff. It doesn't seem like this is like they're looking for large signage. It's a wildlife tree sign. And so I'm assuming it's just a little sign at the bottom of a tree that says an owl lives here. So I guess for clarity through the chair to staff, what are we even debating here?
So, through the chair, my understanding is that the purpose of this signage is to advise users of the trail network that there are trees in the heritage forest that could represent a hazard, but have been kept for the purpose of wildlife trees and snags. So, my understanding is that they've recommended this as an alternative to removing what might otherwise be taken out in another scenario. So, in other words, rather than removing or modifying a tree to mitigate a hazard, it's advising users of the trail that those types of hazards do exist in the forest.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea. I just think, if we're going to go that route of, saying, there is nature and trees and growth in our forests that include wildlife, then all of our forests, I think it's a good idea for all of our forests to have that type of stuff, to remind everyone that, we do have it's a protected area and a sensitive area, and that a lot of our places do have these types of things. So I think it's a good idea. I just think it should be the part of a bigger discussion. Our trails be behind the pool there. Same thing, lots of walking networks down where, all of our trails really, they're all sensitive areas, and that's why they're protected. So I think it's a good idea. It just needs to be part of a bigger picture. I don't like doing it. If someone comes to us, to the Parks and Rec Committee, next month and says, "Oh, I'd like this trail to now start having," we're going to start having the same discussion 5 times. It's better to have it once and do it that way.
We agree. Councillor Harrison.
So I do think actually Councillor Walker has the right of it on this issue. I think it would be more appropriate to defer this to the budget conversation. I think that's the direction Councillor Filmer wants to have, respectfully. Like, he's not saying this is a bad idea. It's just he doesn't want to see 50 different one-offs coming across his desk where he's like, okay, I also support this sign, I guess. And I think that's a fair concern. I think he's actually being pretty reasonable with this. And as we're having first reading of our financial plan today, it loops into that same conversation where we start having an overarching conversation about, well, how much money do we want to allocate for signage? And are there grant opportunities or not? My only concern with this, from having the recent update from staff, is it seems to me this is a way to address a potential liability. So I think we all saw the image of the giant tree falling in the windstorm in Qualicum Beach. Now, obviously, it's very rare there'd be any risk. It's a very low probability. But this is still ultimately something where potentially there's a liability issue. So just through the chair to staff, if I may, I like Councillor Fulmer's idea to defer this to budget, but would there be an outstanding liability issue in the interim if we wait a little bit on this one?
Through the chair, I'd say we'd have to take a closer look at that. If there's an immediate liability issue that can't wait until that discussion, then we could always put up something temporary. So deferring it to the overall budget and signage discussion is entirely appropriate if that's what council would like to do.
I think the wayfinding and budget discussion. Councillor Felmer.
Yeah, I'll just provide some feed or background on this one. So basically what's happened is there's a couple of really old rotten trees in the heritage forest that have been eaten away by beetles and woodpeckers and whatnot. And there's a lot of people that walk through the heritage forest that then write to the commission saying, oh, this is dangerous, this is going to fall down, or it doesn't look very good. But the Heritage Forest Commission knows that tree, that old rotten tree is a home for for wildlife. And so it's not so much as the danger of something falling and doing something, it's more or less informing the public that this is why we're keeping this. Yes, it doesn't look very nice. Yes, it looks dangerous, but this is why we're keeping it. But they've been having the discussion for the past year of trying to find a way of informing the public about this. So that's more or less the background on that one.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
So we actually had a motion to defer? I think Councillor Walker is going down that road as we speak. Councillor Walker.
I'd rather this just pass and then it's never discussed again, because this is a lot of effort for something that probably shouldn't be, but I'll move to defer this to a future discussion relating to signage around town.
Second. Thank you. Discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you.
I'll move B.
Second.
Discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Passed unanimous, Heather. Thank you. Delegations. Lally Grauer, Sarah Chetsik, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, and Elizabeth Northcott, Aerosmith Groundwater Alliance. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I think Haley's just going to get you up on the screen here.
Let me see. Bring it up. We were just gonna, sorry, Your Worship, we were just gonna do voices only,
Okay, thank you.
and they should be unmuted now, so we should be good to go. All right, can you
The
hear me?
floor is yours, ladies. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Lally Grauer, and my colleague is Sarah Cheswick. We are both residents of Qualicum Beach and members of Aerosmith Groundwater Alliance, a group of volunteers concerned with aquifers in our region. We are asking you today to consider a resolution which would make Qualicum Beach a blue community, joining the 35 municipalities in Canada who have participated in this initiative of the Council of Canadians. Endorsing this resolution with us are 34 local businesses, as well as Communities Protecting Our Coast, CPOC, Sea Legacy, Aerosmith Watersheds Coalition Society, the Qualicum Beach Residents Association, St. Mark's Anglican Church, St. Stephen's United Church Creation Care Team, the Society of Organized Services, SOS, and the local Canadian Federation of University Women. More than 175 individuals have signed letters of support, and last night, newsflash, the Board of Education committed School District 69 to becoming a blue community. I'll ask a representative of our supporters, the Reverend Canon Elizabeth Northcott, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, Mayor and honorable members of Council. My name is Elizabeth Northcott, and I'm the minister at St. Mark's Anglican Church. Our parish council has joined with many other organizations and enterprises in Qualicum to encourage this council to declare that our town will become a blue community, alongside Nanaimo, Victoria, and others on the island who have done so. We are very excited to be a partner of good stewardship of the resources put in our hands. As a faith community, we are ready to participate in making good choices to keep our community vibrant and renewing.
Thank you, Canon Northcott. In Qualicum Beach, we are so well served by the municipal water system and our temperate rainforest climate that it is easy for us to take water for granted. But it is important that we address what water means to us here. Becoming a blue community means recognizing that water and sanitation are human rights worldwide. People we talked to were amazed to learn that the Government of Canada has not officially recognized these rights. That we should affirm them here in Qualicum was considered a no-brainer. And they also thought we should do what we can to get the provincial and federal government to formally recognize these rights. For the last 5 years, the province of British Columbia has recorded growing drought in our region and forecast an increasingly drier future, making it even more important that water is recognized as a human right for all. Over to you, Sarah.
Becoming a blue community also means that the town of Qualicum Beach pledges to discontinue or phase out the use of bottled water in municipal facilities and at municipal events. People we talked to responded strongly to this aspect of the resolution. They deplore that plastic waste has grown exponentially in the last 20 years, choking our planet. Everyone is now learning that only 9% of plastic waste is recycled in Canada. By bringing this issue to you, we are no doubt preaching to the converted. Qualicum Beach has made huge strides in the reduction of plastic waste by outlawing the use of plastic bags and straws in its 2019 bylaw. This bylaw makes us proud to be citizens of Qualicum Beach. By stopping the sale of individually used plastic water bottles in its buildings and at its events, our towns can continue to take the lead in reducing plastic waste and set a standard for the community. We do not need to wait for the provincial or federal leadership here. At the same time, Qualicum Beach can promote its own clean, safe, and great tasting water that our community is known for. Many people we encounter spoke proudly of our local water. Our wonderful water is the result of its natural origins, but also our engineers, the municipal plant, the workforce that ensures our water is clean, safe, and good tasting. Our local publicly financed, owned, and operated water facilities fulfill the third commitment that must be made for Qualicum Beach to become a blue community, and that is to promote and support such facilities. We urge Qualicum Beach to become a blue community. Our municipal government's involvement is crucial to raising awareness about the human right to water and sanitation, safeguarding our municipal water system, and taking action to reduce waste and to protect our environment. Thank you for taking time to hear us this afternoon, your worship and council.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very good. Very short, actually. You had like 45 seconds to spare, so I applaud you for that. Any questions from council? Seeing that, Councillor Harris.
Would it be possible to maybe forward this correspondence on to staff? I'm just looking at the 3 resolutions. I definitely support the third. I think that's a no-brainer. We should be letting people know about the high quality water services we have in our community, because it is second to none. Our town has done an outstanding job on that. But just for the second resolution, it might be interesting to get feedback from staff if there's anything like, say, for firefighter training. I know I've heard potentially some people had some concerns, or the legalities of it. So maybe just, it's not something we need immediately, but just maybe eventually get some feedback from staff on what might be involved with that.
I believe Councillor Harrison's request was that we could get the information presented today sent to us at the staff and council. Is that possible, Sarah?
Of course it is.
Councillor Walker.
Perhaps we could refer this to staff for a report.
Yeah,
So
I think
I'll
that's
do
the
such.
intent of what I was hoping to do. Thank
Yep,
you.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Mayor, if we could just thank them, it's an important discussion, so that's very appreciated.
But I already did, and I will again. Thank you very much, ladies. Good
Thank you.
presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Correspondence. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
Correspondence, Qualicum Community Education and Wellness Society.
I did have a letter prepared, Your Worship, but or a motion prepared, but since it's being deferred to an in-camera, I'll wait for that.
Thank you.
And on the next one, on Barton Broadway, I'd like to make a notice of motion that staff, due to the COVID-19 restrictions, the council instructs staff to work with Barton Broadway Theatre Society to explore options to utilize town-owned land for the performance alternatives to host the Society's 2021 performance season. Thank you.
Second.
Unless council is prepared to move with that right now, it could be a motion and then the stamp.
I'm
If
okay
you
with
move,
that.
if you move, I'll second.
Are you okay with that, your worship?
Overwhelming support, Councillor Westbrook, so why don't you just get it done?
Okay. Okay, that's my motion.
Seconded by
I
Councillor.
gave it to Ms. Svensson, so she has it.
Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Passed unanimously.
Mayor, there was discussion was requested by one of the councillors.
Which one?
It's all right. It's all right. We passed, so we'll just carry on.
Thank you.
And then we have a third item with the Legion request, and I move the recommendation.
Second.
I'll second. Oh, sorry.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. That was the late adder, Councillor Westbrook?
That's correct.
I was gonna put that on my report, so I guess that's gone. So that's good. Public and statutory hearings. Haley, are we ready?
We sure are.
Thank you very much. Pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act, the public are invited to make representations to council regarding matters contained within the proposed bylaw entitled Town of Qualicum Beach Land Use and Subdivision Bylaw Number 580, 1999, Amendment 230 Higson Crescent, Bylaw Number 580.118, 2020. After the Director of Planning introduces the bylaw, the first person registered on the speakers list will be invited to unmute their microphone to speak. When it's your turn to speak, please state your full name and address for the record. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak, and staff will provide a verbal warning when you have 20 seconds remaining. Your microphone will be muted after 3 minutes have elapsed. All comments must be related to the subject bylaw. Any unrelated comments will result in your microphone being muted. After each person registered on the speakers list has spoken for a first time, I will invite any other members of the public to speak. Please indicate that you wish to speak by using the raise hand feature on Zoom or by dialing *9 if you are participating by telephone. Once everyone has the opportunity to speak once, I will invite the public to speak a second time for a further 3 minutes. There will be 2 opportunities to speak. Following the second call for speakers, I will declare the public hearing closed. Mr. Sales, will you please introduce the bylaw?
Thank you, Mayor Weeds. The owner of 230 Higson Crescent has made an application to change the zoning for their property from residential 1 to small lot residential 1. The proposal is to permit a carriage house in addition to the existing single family house on the property. Currently, as the zoning stands, a secondary suite is permitted. That's a suite that's attached to the house. However, the owner would like the suite above a detached garage. The subject property is R1, identified as single family residential in the official community plan. The property is also within the hazardous lands development permit area and designated as floodplain. So there are floodplain requirements which dovetail quite nicely with the concept of putting living quarters on the second story of the building. This application was first considered by council on June 24th. It was subsequently reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission in July. And there's been a few changes done since then. Specifically, there's privacy screening that was installed adjacent to the neighboring property to the northwest. And the structure was moved slightly away from the west property line. So the setback was increased to 4.5 meters. That's essentially the summary of the application. Of course, the plans are in the agenda today. And if there are any questions from council, I'll take them later in the agenda. But for now, let's turn it back over to the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke. Heather, is there any written submissions?
Yes, we have a binder with 6 people speaking in opposition of the proposal and 1 in support.
Thank you.
Council has received all of those letters as well as staff.
Thank you very much. Haley, please invite the first speaker.
Okay, and first up is John Wood.
Good evening, John.
Good evening, Mayor Weiss and Council. Thank you very much. John Wood, 466 Troon Close in Qualicum Beach. I would like to speak in favor of the rezoning and subdivision of 230 Higson Crescent. We've seen an example here of a very cooperative owner in making the changes that were requested to make it fit more with the form, character, setback, and whatnot of neighboring properties. It's an innovative design. I personally think it's good looking. It does fit in well with the neighborhood, and it's a good use of the land. It checks off all of the things that need to be checked off for meeting requirements of the OCP and so on, for density, height, character, setback, parcel coverage, parking, and flood guidelines. So in summary, I think it's a very good project and should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Haley, go ahead.
And then next up was Mr. Ronald Beek. However, he did mention earlier today that he may not want to speak any further. So I'll let him decide if he would like to speak now.
Thank you. It's Ron Beek from 209 Higson Crescent.
Good evening, Ron.
Hi, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've submitted a letter, so I won't bother everyone and take up everyone's time, with the understanding that that'll be reviewed. My objections and my concerns with the rezoning application are primarily twofold. One is rezoning will result in a drastic reduction in the setbacks from the road, which are completely not in keeping, and with due respect to Mr. Wood, completely not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood in which I live. And the second one is the inadvertent secondary effect of the rezoning is that it vastly increases by almost just under 30% the allowable buildable area. So my suggestion on the lot, which once again would take away from the ambiance and the character of the neighborhood and the green space in between large structures. So I'll just summarize by basically saying I don't know. The neighbor to the north at 227 can probably speak more towards the direct impact on them and their property. However, with regards to the neighborhood, I've made suggestions of primarily of having covenants on the property. If this is to be approved, that would retain the existing setbacks of the rest of the residential neighborhood as well as the buildable area. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time, Ron.
Okay.
And then next up would be Nori Jordan.
Hi, Mayor and Council, can you hear me?
We most certainly can. Nori, go ahead.
Thank you. Nori Jordan, 224 Higson Crescent. I live right next door to 230 Higson Crescent. My talk is twofold. I came here by way of New Westminster. I witnessed firsthand the builds that went on over the course of 30 years, including laneway houses, monster houses. So this kind of building created congestion and pollution, more people. And I left that congestion to come to the beautiful Vancouver Island and fell in love with Qualicum Beach. When I stood on the front of my property at 224 Higson Crescent, I knew without a shadow of a doubt this was my home because of its beautiful solitude, the trees, the expansive space at the back of the properties. And I finally met the many neighbors that live here, and they're wonderful folks. So the impact of this request for application change from R1 to SLR1, I completely oppose. And these are my reasons. First, to the overall community, it will have a huge community impact, changing it, and a domino effect that could cause changes throughout all of Qualicum Beach, causing it to be another lower mainland community as opposed to a wonderful, quiet town. Traffic, parking, overcrowding, upset neighbors because of noise factors, impact of our natural resources, and impact of future sales, in particular in this property at 224 Hickson Crescent, which my husband and I own. On a personal level, I take this very personally. This is my home. This is where I live for solitude, for quiet, for peace of mind. And over the course of the time that the new property owner has come to come and dwell on the property, I've had to have several comments of excess noise from visitors and family. And I've been put in a position of being a complainer, which I have on my own account. No one has said that to me, but because I voiced my opinion, I feel like I'm now being labeled as a, pardon?
Sorry, you have 20 seconds remaining.
Very briefly then, the building that is going to be proposed will create a fishbowl effect to my property. The sound is reflected off of the big townhouse and echoes right into my living room, into my bedroom. And that's why I had to notify the owner. He was good to look after things quickly, but then it got a little bit dicey. I would have to build a massive hedge of over 20 feet by over 100 feet long.
Oh, sorry, Nori, I think you've been muted with your time allowance. You have to wait until next time. Haley, who's next?
That was the last of the people that registered to speak. However, we did have some people that said they would maybe want to speak. So if anybody would like to speak for the first time, you may raise your hands now. And seeing no one, if John Wood wanted to speak again, this would be your opportunity, John. And if not John, then Mr. Beeg. And if not Mr. Beeg, then Ms. Jordan.
I thought Miss Jordan might come back. Miss Jordan, did you want to finish your conversation?
Yes, Mayor Weiss, I'd like to do that. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. The building itself overlooks my property, the backyard. There is a ground patio and an upper deck that overlook my property, which would immediately take away any privacy we might have there. The house itself will be used as a vacation property. And when people go on vacation, they want to have fun and visit and have company and parties and good times, which means that it'll no longer reflect a quiet neighborhood that our neighbors have been accustomed to, and it'll impact me directly. The front property will be used as a rental property, and that in itself would potentially cause problems to myself as a homeowner if the right renter is not brought in, or if there's a revolving door of renters, which sometimes can be the case. I have been extremely stressed over this. I do have personal health issues, and I really disagree with this, and I object to changing zoning of 230 Hickson Crescent from residential R1 to small lot residential SLR1. I'd like to end in thanking the support of Town and Council for listening to my objections today, for the neighbors that surrounding this area for their support as well. And the last comment I want to make, because I'm not a political person, I've never done a talk like this before in my entire life. I want to know why it is that neighbors would not be brought on board before a property owner would go ahead and spend, resources, money, time, and not find a way to bring the neighborhood into this conversation. It's like putting the cart before the horse. So that's where I stand on this. I hope you'll take my comments into consideration to some degree, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any at last speakers? Hearing no further comments, I hereby declare this public hearing for the bylaw entitled Town of Qualicum Beach Land Use and Subdivision Bylaw number 580, 1999, Amendment 230 Higson Crescent, Bylaw number 580.118, 2020 closed. No further comments may be received by council on this matter. Any questions or comments must be referred to staff. Thank you very much. Bylaws, Mr. Sales.
I'll move that.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Zoning Amendment Development Permit 230 Higson Crescent, staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. Recommendation is third reading.
Thank you. Councillor Felmer, thank you. Seconder.
Second.
Councillor Harrison, discussion. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Reese. I don't know if people are aware that in Qualicum Beach, probably about 8-9 years ago, we decided in our OCP that anywhere in Qualicum Beach, if people wanted to build a secondary suite, we would encourage them to. We haven't had a huge uptake. It's not like we've been all of a sudden bombarded with requests for secondary suites, but from time to time we do get one. And I think it's a good thing. People always tell us we don't want urban sprawl, but we also need more housing. And I think this is one way to address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Similar to what Councillor Westbrook just said, I believe, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues today, or not really a conversation, but more a passing comment about, the town promotes this. The town has made a decision that you can have this no matter where you live on your properties in town. But we still require these types of meetings of public and statutory hearings for these types of things. I think it's important to note that a lot of our residents are lucky that we do, because a lot of municipalities that do have that policy or bylaw in place that just say you can build secondary suites don't actually do these types of hearings for that. So I think it is good that we still, or it's lucky that we still go that way. Off of my personal comments, as someone that is young that lives in a secondary suite, these types of things are, this is what promotes your spaces for your local workforce to live, or your senior grandparents that that want to live closer to home. These are the types of things that promote the stuff that we're looking at doing for our community. I do feel really bad for the Higson Crescent neighborhood, because there's a lot going on there right now. I think we're going through one or two different developments that are in the ball. So I do feel really bad. There's a lot going on. It's unfortunate that that's the way it's gone. And then there's one comment that I want to make towards renter assurance. And this is one thing that a lot of municipalities, when they're looking at developing, they go, well, we don't know who's going to rent there. And, it's really scary. And, we might get some young, loud people that are going to rent there. Unfortunately, if you want young people, I'm not loud. I can be loud. But, unfortunately, that's just what you get into. And if you want young people living in your community, it really sucks for a young person to say, oh, I'd really like to live here. Oh, but they don't want me because they think I'm going to be loud, or they think I'm going to be a nuisance. And that's not community. If we want to promote young people getting out on their own and starting something, this is the kind of stuff we need to promote, and this is the stuff we need to get behind. So I fully support this.
Very nice words. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I do also support the zoning amendment. I do think also as well, while I do take some of the considerations and concerns of some of the neighbors apart, this zoning amendment has actually changed as it's gone through the process. There have been some alterations that the homeowners made to try to address some of the concerns of the neighbors, which in the strictest letter of the law, they didn't have to do. They weren't obligated to do it, but they chose to do it. And for me, I hope that's the start of further conversations where some of these concerns of neighbors, maybe that's an evolving conversation that happens over time. I think more for our role though as local government, rather than trying to negotiate relationships, we should be looking at the land use. Is this a more efficient use of the land at the end of the day? And I think when you look at what we've said in our OCP, also what people campaigned on individually, this does have a better usage of the land, either for multi-generational families living together. So this would help people age in place potentially. I think for the other development across the road in Higson, that was one of their long-term aims when they were looking at having more living units in the one building. In this case, it might be someone who's of different demographic. It might also be another family member. But ultimately, I think it aligns more with what we're trying to say. I sympathize if they're getting back-to-back developments right across the street, more or less. But I think if we had another street where there are back-to-back developments, we'd probably be having a very similar conversation because our conversation is more about the land use. So I do hope that those conversations which we heard today are something that continue and some of those concerns are addressed because I think there might be a reasonable common sense compromise that neighbors can find to make things a little bit more positive.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
I'll be quick. The deck on the north side drives me bonkers. I think that's grossly unfair for that neighbor, but on balance, I think this does represent value for the community as a whole. So I have sympathy for, I don't have your name, Ms. Jordan, but it's on balance, unfortunately, I think this is in the best interest of our community.
Thank you. Good comments, gentlemen. I have to agree with almost everything you said. I think the owners have made significant effort to make it bearable. I think they shrunk the deck size. They moved it back and put the privacy barrier up to address some of those concerns, Councillor Walker, but I still get it. And Councillor Harrison and Councillor Filmer, I agree with everything they said other than the being loud part on Councillor Filmer, but other than that, we're good. I call the question, gentlemen. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Sales, zoning amendment 201, 207, 211 First Avenue West. Did you hear me, Luke?
I am unmuted now, is that correct?
Yeah.
No, you are.
You missed the best part of the presentation, but I'll try to repeat. My apologies. You missed the good part. So the town has received an application to amend the zoning for 201, 207, and 211 First Avenue to permit a 40-unit multi-residential development. The proposal is two multi-residential buildings fronting First Avenue. You'll recall that this property was proposed for a larger development several years ago. Since that time, it was split into two parts. The lower section, which is duplex and one fourplex units, that's actually under construction right now. So what we're looking at now is development on the upper portion. The slide you're seeing before you is just highlighting the area we're actually talking about. So the lower section is already underway. Next slide. This is a close-up of the overall concept for the site. This is the landscaping plan, but it very clearly shows the building massing and how it presents itself to the street. So you'll note that the entrance to the development is off Beach Road, and the parking is partially under the building. So I would call it carport style, and the other half of the parking is surface parking. Next slide. These two structures are both 4 stories. The structure to the east, which is closer to Beach Road, is slightly lower in height just because of the slope of the land. So in terms of the recommendations, next slide. Oh, okay, here's a perspective rendering. This is, of course, from the view of towards beach, looking towards the development, looking west. Next slide. Okay, now onto the recommendations. the first thing to note here is that this is an area that very clearly has the support of the OCP in terms of densification. So residential density in this area is very much supported. So from that perspective, this is definitely something that warrants consideration by the town. Potentially bringing 40 condominiums or rental units to this area would clearly be a benefit and align itself with the OCP. There are some details that we'd like to explore a little bit more, and so that's why it's advancing to the next step. So as sort of a housekeeping item, more than anything else, the owner has committed to making the first building residential rental, also a benefit. In order to do that, we do have to have some direction in terms of entering into a housing agreement. So that's the second recommendation there. Next slide. Okay, now moving on into the areas that require a bit more exploration. First of all, there was not a tree and vegetation management plan submitted. Now, from the last application, we were fairly familiar with the site. There aren't very many large trees on the site. There's one in the corner there. If it's similar to the application that was received a few years ago, there's not likely to be any trees retained. It's more an issue of what gets planted. But in any respect, the town does have a requirement that we receive that tree and vegetation management plan for any developments. Secondly, there's no information submitted on building energy efficiency. The staff would like to see some north-south cross sections that include the development to the north. Even though that part of the property is already under construction, it's important to see the size and scale and relation of all these buildings together. So the lower buildings are single story. The building next door will be 4-story. So understanding the relationship between those two, and perhaps some of the issues around shadowing and such. By perspective rendering from Beach Road looking south. So as you saw in the presentation a moment ago, the applicant has provided a perspective rendering from the east side of the property looking along First Avenue. But the grade on Beach drops off pretty heavily as you go north. So what does the view look like when you're looking up at the building? That's something that needs a closer look. And the last one there, a shadow study, including the adjacent existing and proposed buildings. So those lower buildings under construction, how does the 4-story building impact them? And similarly, the house to the west, what is the impact there? And so the recommendation is that the Advisory Planning Commission explore these issues and a few other things that specifically they'd be asked to look into. First of all, whether the proposed development complies with the village design guidelines, and if not, what types of changes should be made so that it is compliant. Secondly, the suitability of the proposed underbuilding parking and adjacent surface parking. It doesn't qualify as underground parking in terms of our definition. It's largely exposed to the outside and fairly visible from Beach Road. So some comment on how that would how that could potentially be improved, maybe by some screening or shielding it off from Beach Road. And thirdly, how the First Avenue frontage could be made more pedestrian friendly. There's a lot of language in our official community plan about making things pedestrian friendly and activating them from the perspective of people walking and cycling on the street. Right now, there's only one entrance to each building from First Avenue. So maybe there's an opportunity to make it more interactive with more front doors or such. It could go a number of different directions. So I'd like to refer it to the Advisory Planning Commission to explore some of these ideas. So I don't believe there's any more recommendations, but next slide, if you would.
We're not seeing any slides.
Well,
I am.
Well, there are no more slides. That was the last recommendation. Councillor Westbrook, you may have a different Zoom screen up, but there were some slides being presented.
Okay.
With this, if there are any questions from council, I'll take them at this time.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. During the previous term, we approved a project on that location. I believe it was 3 stories. And I think the units were more like 1,600 square feet. And the reason why we thought that was a good idea, because that would accommodate families. Typically, a family would have to have 3 bedrooms. So that was a good thing. It wasn't also not so boxy. I think it's a good idea to have that development proceed. But I agree with you that perhaps working with the Advisory Planning Commission, we could make these buildings more in line with the character of Qualicum Beach. When we approved the Berwick building next door, I asked them actually to set back on the top floor, so to break it up a bit, so it doesn't sort of loom over when you come driving up, in this case, up on First and towards Beach, that's kind of broken up a bit at the top. Little things like that can make a big difference. So I would support first reading, but I would certainly encourage the owner, architect, and the APC, and then our planners to try and make it fit according to what you described as how it fits the character of Qualicum Beach. Thank you. So I move first reading.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask if, because it is first reading, is there an eagerness to move 1, 2, and 3 at once? Or do you want to do
discuss one separately?
I just moved the first one, the first reading.
Yeah, I was just checking to see if there was a willingness to do all 3.
Yeah.
There
yeah.
isn't?
Well, I would, but I think it's better in this case to do one at a time.
Okay. Number 1, further discussion. Councillor Harris.
Oh, sorry, I was just seconding it. I do see where Councillor Westbrook is coming from. I think that it is an appropriate land use given the location. Hopefully, it'll also get a little bit more foot traffic in the village core. So that's a good thing to have. I think going to the APC, we're going to get to that in a sec, so I won't talk about that at all. But I think first reading is appropriate just to start the conversation.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. I think the density is something we need downtown, and the fact that half of this for 10 years will be rentals, I think, is an incredible opportunity for our town. But the massing of these structures and the aesthetics that they've chosen, I don't think it's ready to send to the APC. I think it would be much more appropriate for this to come back to council after some refinements have been done, possibly bringing that top floor into the roof line, some articulation along the front, and then further discussion with staff. This is not something I think that represents the gateway to our community, and I have concerns advancing this.
Well, I understand your concerns, as do I, but I think that's what the APC does. I most certainly am not an architect, don't plan on being one. So I think, first reading, send it to them and see what they come back and see what the APC gives us to work on. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I'm in a similar boat with Councillor Walker, really with everyone else on council. I'm okay with it, though, going to the APC. I'm not going to support first reading. It's very rare that I don't support a first reading on a development, for the reason that it is very boxy. It's not the type of development that Qualicum Beach sees. It's not the type of development that Qualicum Beach wants or needs. I don't think a lot of thought went into this one, which is disappointing. We've worked with this applicant before. Although there's issues that, but I don't support the character, the feel, the look, and the idea of it. I know we'll get to the second motion, so I'm going to speak to that one as well when we start talking about rentals. So I won't touch on that one quite yet. But I'm not going to support first reading. I'm okay with it going to the APC. I'll support it going to the APC. But I think the developer or the applicant needs to know that this isn't what we're looking for, and that something better needs to come forward. Hopefully the APC makes good recommendations. Hopefully those recommendations are followed. And by second reading, we have something that does fit Qualicum Beach, because I'd hate to see another development get pushed down due to feel and character. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we have ample opportunity to get to that form and character. So I do support first reading. Further comments on first reading? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, Councillor Walker, Councillor Filmer.
And I move the second recommendation for adoption of the going into basically into a housing agreement.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Walker. Discussion, Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I full on support going into this agreement, although I just think 10 years is a bit short. So I was going to ask the question to the chair to staff, why 10 years? And is it possible to extend that? I think, when we're looking at rentals, if we're looking at long-term rental, long-term for a young person is not 10 years. So I think we need to start, we need to have that discussion. So through the chair to staff, what is the possibility of going past 10 years on an agreement?
Through the chair, essentially this is at council's direction. If council would like to see a longer period of time, that motion can be made. Housing agreements can be entered into for longer periods of time. Another possibility, which was recently considered for the College Heights building, the old Heritage building replica, was that it was 10 years, but that the obligation wouldn't be released until the vacancy rate had risen above 3% for a minimum of 6 months. So that's a compromise that doesn't necessarily fix it to a firm timeline, but establishes a benchmark where it would then be released.
Through to Luke, is this the same deal that we've made on the lower section there, the duplexes, the fourplex?
The 10-year obligation is the same. In that case, there wasn't a housing agreement in place that required the 10-year rental. The developer chose to do it because it was related to the home warranty period. So by committing for a 10-year period, then the home warranty wasn't required as the owner would be the same for that entire time period. So a little bit different situation, but the same period of time.
I understand Councillor Filmer's concerns. I think what we have to remember, I think, as a council is, it's these guys' money. Like it's the developers. I don't think at the lower rent level after building is going to be making money hand over fist. And it's important to know that I think in 10 years he may choose to sell for condos, which, I get mixed feelings, and I understand where Councillor Filmer is coming from, but I understand where the person who's putting the investment in needs to see some return as well. So I'm middle of the road on this one. Further discussion, Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. So this reminds me a little bit of a conversation yesterday at VIEA, where Councillor Filmer will be a presenter tomorrow. I hope you get to talk a little bit about that later on. But there was a conversation with developers and a municipal planner from the city of Victoria. And one thing they talked about from the developer side is that we talk about the developer's money. It's actually the bank's money in many cases. It actually isn't always the developer's money. It's often they're getting a loan from a bank, and the bank will look at a variety of things in the pro forma. And so I do think that there's a conversation perhaps here, but we do have to be sensitive that sometimes it's not the intransigence of the developer. It's actually someone in an office in a bank saying that now we won't give you a loan if you ask for too much. So I think that when we're having this conversation, just because we've sort of flagged a few concerns, which are very serious to the building, we might want to get some feedback from the developer on that as far as what actually works on his side before we start piling on too many different conditions. I think building one for rental for 10 years is a good start. Let's maybe have staff follow up. Because this is only first reading, there's a couple more readings and a public hearing. Hopefully that's a conversation that we can get some feedback on both sides from, and then maybe get some information on staff on this. So as we move to second reading, I'd assume that this will still be part of second reading, if I may, through the chair to staff.
Well, based on the comments from council and considering that there's an advisory planning commission in between, that conceivably a lot could change between first and second reading.
So what we're saying is we have moved and seconded this one. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. It just follows me into a question, but I will just comment on one thing there. I agree with Councillor Harrison. What he's saying is, it's not necessarily always the developer's money. It's the banks and whatever loan they're getting. But I do think, I understand the predicament developers get put in as it is at the end of the day. Sure, it is their money and what they're trying to build, and they're in the business. They're in a business, and that's what business is. But our business is not to protect their business. Our business is to give our people what they want and what they're asking for. So I understand developers get put in predicaments where they might lose, they might gain, and that's the business they're in. But that's not the business that I'm in, and unfortunately, that's what you're going to be put through. However, I guess what the question that I'm going to ask, and it's off of Councillor Harrison's, if we approve this 10-year now, is there ways of us during second or third reading to going back to this, or is this approved because it's prior to adoption? the amendment, blah, 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 the owner enters into a housing agreement. So if we vote in favor of this now, do we get to go back to it, or is this it?
Through the chair, this could certainly be revisited. If council does intend to revisit it, there's not much value in actually passing the motion today. So I think a more appropriate motion, if it's really important for council to explore the length of time and have that discussion with the developer, that should be the motion rather than a specific direction about the housing agreement. You could direct staff to explore arrangements regarding the rental period, to consider arrangements beyond 10 years or something to that effect.
So I'll move to lay the current motion on the table and have that well, basically allow staff to enter into discussions with the proponent, discussing timelines for the rental agreement on building 1.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Item number 3.
I move all of number 3.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you.
Mayor?
Councillor Walker.
In the past, we've made special motions that no structures will be age restricted. Is that a motion through the chair to staff that we should also be directing?
Through the chair, that there is an existing covenant on the property that already has that requirement on from the approval several years ago. So that's why there's no requirement being suggested today.
Perfect.
Thank you. The next item, I think it was my mistake. I was supposed to remove this from the agenda during the agenda review. Daniel, I did not do that. Should I just most likely at this point in time defer this one until next meeting?
Yes, Your Worship, because there's still some ongoing dialogue around that issue, I would recommend that council defer and we can bring back the matter once we've concluded dialogue.
I'll second that.
Moved by myself, seconded. Councillor Walker, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Town of Qualicum Beach financial plan.
Move first reading.
Second.
As well.
Discussion? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I thought the staff will do a lot of good work in this preparation of the plan. And usually the intent of first reading is to put it out there. And we'll get feedback and we'll think about it some more ourselves. And what we also have done in the past, that there was a staff update on the financial plan for some of those areas where we want to go a little deeper. So I'm happy with first reading, but I know there will be much more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
So I just want to also thank staff. I know there's a lot of hard work that goes into this. This is a very high level document at this stage. There's some granularity, but there's some details also too that are needed, but that comes, I think, more as second reading. My only comment is that at this stage, we've got a roughly 4.3% tax increase. And I think we should bear in mind with everything happening for small businesses, they pay roughly 3.5 times as much tax as a homeowner. For each dollar more in tax a homeowner sees, there's $3.50 for the same value of a building, essentially, that most small businesses will pay. Not all, but usually your landlord gives you a triple net lease where you are paying the tax through your lease. So just as we move forward, we might think about aspects of our financial plan, particularly for capital expenditures, or we might want to defer a couple things a year or two. I don't have enough information right now to suggest what, but just hopefully that's a conversation we have at second reading. Because ideally, I'd like to get that tax increase down just a little bit.
Councillor Westbrook.
Just a correction. I believe that the increase or the rate for the business community is 2.5, just under 2.5. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Councillor Walker.
Thank you. On the same vein, I was going to make a notice of motion, but there's a chance I won't get to make it, which was to direct staff to have a report on adjusting the residential versus commercial rates. So after this motion, perhaps, Councillor Harrison, that may be a motion that may be something you'd be interested in giving doesn't have to be passed, but it just gives an opportunity for staff to sort of have that conversation with council and the public.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously, thank you. Councillor Harrison, look at you, are chomping at the bit to say something.
Oh, no, I was just,
No?
for me, it's potato, because we're obviously not going to have the conversation now. We're going to have it at a subsequent meeting. So we'll have the report from staff and all the
You know,
information.
I think we'll have numerous conversations around this before we're done. All right, Waterworks rate regulation bylaw, staff recommendation.
First time reading, move first right reading.
And Councillor Filmer, thank Councillor Filmer moved it. Westbrook second. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Both this report and the sewer report both mention that we don't have water debt. And I would argue for both of those that we have significant water and sewer debt as far as infrastructure funding that has yet to be organized. So I appreciate that that conversation has been raised in this report. I won't make any motions about that, but it's I think that moving forward, the next time this bylaw comes forward, there should be a very serious conversation about future infrastructure expenses and making sure those are tied into either the water rates or into further asset management planning.
Comments? Anything else? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. I think when we get to the asset management, that's part of the philosophy that the users pay for the maintenance of the services. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
It's there and we keep talking about it, but until we actually start writing down what the total cost is, because it's significant. I mean, this staff report, the sewer deficit is large, but the water deficit is substantial. I'm just going from memory. I think it's about $18 million that we're going to have to pay over the next little while, and we're not setting aside money right now for that. So it's all fine to have strategies and conversations and policies, but what's really needed is to actually start setting money aside or have a conversation about taking on debt.
That's what we're doing.
Further conversation. Seeing none, gentlemen, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, carried unanimously. Thank you.
And
Sewer.
first reading for sewer.
Second.
Sewer rate bylaw.
Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Committee liaison reports. I don't have one this time. I think it's the first time. I will want to say that the last 3 weeks, most likely 90 or 80% of my time has been working with the RDN in camera about certain things. And it's actually been released today. It's about North Island 911. And I got to give special kudos to the CEO of Parksville, Kiva Kaler, and Daniel, our CEO, for, I can't tell you how much work they too have put into this issue that we've been working on for, like say, almost 3 weeks. Significant report will come forward from that. But I could just say that with the work of our CEO, myself, the RDN, and the city of Parksville and our local area directors, we made big headways yesterday, and it's all good news. So I'll leave it at that for now, but I will give you a detailed report of what those conversations were and what it looked like and at the next meeting. So thank you very much for that.
Your worship.
Yes.
When we dealt with the correspondence regarding Remembrance Day services, perhaps for the benefit of people who are listening in or watching this, they may not know what that recommendation was. So perhaps you want to elaborate on what we approved regarding the candlelight service and the Remembrance Day service.
I'll do that. I think that's a very good idea, and thank you for that. The staff recommendation was, which we passed a short time ago, the council authorized the closure of Veterans Way between Memorial Avenue and Berwick Road North on the following days and times, ensuring town requirements are met, including emergency services notification, and ensuring all provincial health guidelines related to COVID-19 pandemic are followed. Tuesday, November 10th, 2020, from 2:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. for the private Remembrance Day candlelight service at the Qualicum Beach Legion. Wednesday, November 11th, 2020, from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. for a private Remembrance Day service at the Qualicum Beach Legion, and for the council authorize in-kind support for the Remembrance Day services through town provision of barricades. And that's what we passed some short time ago. That's public consumption and idea. Thank you very much. Parks and Rec, Councillor Philman.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Weiss. Nothing to report other than if anyone's attending the Vancouver Island Economic Summit tomorrow. There is a forum on leadership tomorrow that I am participating in. So that is starting at 2:30 tomorrow. So if you have signed up, please join in. There'll be a live Q&A and roundtable with us afterwards. As I know right now, there's been lots of attendees to this year's Vancouver Island Economic Summit, and it was opened and welcomed by Prime Minister Trudeau with our VIEA today or yesterday. So again, that's just tomorrow, and tomorrow is the last day of the summit. That concludes my report.
You have someone looking after Archie?
Well, I'll be here, so I'll be here.
I just throwing it out there just in case. Community Development, Councillor Harris.
Hi, so I am part of VIA conference as well, so I'll be sure to submit a lot of questions about bow ties. So there's a couple of things going on. I should actually just switch to my Word document. I forget that. So October the 8th, there was both a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce, and also there was a quick online Zoom call with people from Macola Housing. So Macola Housing are a nonprofit housing developer. They manage about $1 billion of affordable housing. So they are literally the largest affordable housing developer west of Ontario. And it was called Small is Beautiful, with copious amounts of John Cougar Mellencamp, which was great. And it talked a lot about rural communities and some of their experiences with multiple projects around BC. It was very informative, and even with the John Mellencamp in there. Beyond that, also too, on October 22nd, CMHC came out with grant funding for projects which could potentially tie into the Veterans Homeless commitment that we made. So I reached out to Gord John's guy in his office, and also to the service officer for the Courtney Legion, who's sort of running point on some of the data gathering efforts, as I think that gathering information might be something that would be an appropriate use of that grant funding. So I've been doing a little bit of back and forth with him on that. And beyond that, let's see, October 15th, there was a bit of an overlap with the museum, so I missed out on that meeting, but there was a meeting for Oceanside Health and Wellness. And one thing that I'm really concerned about as we start looking at the impacts of the pandemic is going to be the impacts on lower paid workers in our regional economy, and also increased cost of living. So getting ahead of some of those issues, there's a lot of good work that is being done by multiple organizations. And then there was a notice of motion I put in, which I'm just trying to bring up now. So this is a notice of motion, which normally we would do at a normal council meeting, but because we have a meeting scheduled the next little bit, which has an in-camera meeting, I just suggest we might want to deal with it at the public portion of that meeting, because the motion is just for a conversation. So just be it resolved that council directs staff to discuss with BC Housing the use of town land for a temporary cold weather shelter for individuals with mild to moderate needs, and report back to council. So it's just saying staff have a conversation and give us report back. So hopefully we can get on that. And I don't know if that's something BC Housing does, honestly. The intent here is to make sure that people who are beyond our capacity to help, there isn't a concern about that when we look at potentially doing something in that space. Beyond that, I'll talk about my conference next month, because I want Councillor Filmer to have his moment with his conference.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, you're up next. You want
I just had
on that?
A question for Councillor Harrison, or I guess for all of us. I was under the impression we were going to take a pause at the end of this meeting, all run down to town hall and carry on in camera. Am I mistaken with that?
Oh, sorry. I meant there's a scheduled meeting on Monday.
Oh, okay.
And so it was for the public portion after the Monday meeting, because we're not, like, if we were going to say we're going to choose a location or we're going to do this for sure, I think that'd be highly inappropriate. But I think just because it's asking staff to have a conversation, I prefer us not to wait essentially 2.5 to 3 weeks to allow staff to have that conversation when winter's basically here.
Your Worship, could I ask a question? This is Daniel.
Please go ahead.
Just wondering if there's an update with regard to your work with the school district and the track.
Oh, right. Sorry. I reached out Our original resolution said we didn't specify how much funding we might provide for the track. It was not tied into being dependent upon the RDN. So the Oceanside Services Committee, they recently had a meeting. It was originally close to a 4-3 split, and then it became a 3-4 vote. And that meeting is available online, and you can listen to that if you'd like. I still think there's a case to providing some support for what the school district is doing, as they're making a very generous donation of their capital reserves, and it's very hard for them to replenish it. I am also aware, though, that we're in a difficult time, and what we could contribute is nowhere near what the RDN can contribute. But I think it makes sense with a lot of seniors in our community who will have a hard time if they have arthritis or mobility issues. There's not a lot of options for them to exercise, and having a rubberized track which is soft on your joints and easily accessible for people with all levels of mobility is a good long-term investment for the town. But then again, there's a lot of conversations. The school district has essentially scaled down their proposal to a fewer lanes and perhaps less infrastructure underneath the lanes. But that's a conversation where they had an ad hoc committee meeting. I reached out to Kevin Elder, who's the superintendent of the school district. He recognized there's just an accidental oversight, and hopefully I can report back to council as to what the school district is doing with more precise numbers, and we can have a reasonable conversation about what support, if any, will be considered in the future.
Councillor Walker, Arts and Culture.
I've had a busy few weeks, but I have nothing to report.
I was just going to say you probably haven't had any time for any of those meetings, so.
I've had a few, but yeah, it's been busy.
Better have. Congratulations, by the way. Good job.
Tentative.
Councillor, Protective Services.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I'd like to ask council for support for a referral to the Select Committee on Public Safety, and that is to consider the idea of signalized crosswalks on top of speed humps in the Highway 19A area where we've had many complaints. I could imagine, but I don't want to list wherever I think is possible, but to consider the idea for, say, Milner Gardens, Hemsworth, where people are trying to cross and there's always speeding. I know Keith Smith, who turned 89 this year, he's often been on speed watch, and that's probably one of the worst locations where people just come in and don't slow down. And a couple other spots like the future when we finish a Rodway Trail to have a crossing for people there. I think for people to slow down and for public safety, I think a signalized crosswalk on top of a speed hump might help us doing that. So that's my motion to refer. I was going to make a notice of motion, but it's just a referral to the Select Committee of Public Safety. So that's my motion.
I'd second that.
That's seconded by Councillor Filmer. Sorry. Discussion. See, go ahead, Councillor Filmer, and then I'll chime in. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea. I definitely think it does need some looking into, because I don't know what it's going to be like hitting a speed hump at 70 in front of Milner Gardens there. I mean, I would probably do it because it'd be great for a ride, but I think that one needs looking into. But I fully support a report coming forward and the committee discussing it.
Good comments. I can assure you, Councillor Filmer, you'd only do it once. Yeah, we had speed humps when I first worked at the airport years ago. We put them in, and we left an oil pan there the first day. So, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could, driving through Landfill, we see these speed humps, and I don't like speed humps or speed bumps, but those are effective. And I just like to move to make an amendment. I can't remember the exact motion, but signalized and or speed hump as opposed to signalized speed humps. I think the conversation should be whether we do, because I mean, it's very expensive to do the signalization, and I'm not sure it necessarily adds significant value. So that's my motion, if I could.
You okay with it? Is that a friendly amendment, Councillor Westbrook?
Well, at this point, we're just asking the Select Committee to consider it. And I know we're going to have our engineer as part of that committee. There will be RCMP, there will be other people who are concerned about traffic safety will be there. So I would say leave it with them at this point. They may want to bring it up anyway to have signalized pedestrian crossing, because they do work. I was concerned when we put a crosswalk for the golf course when that reopened, when we open that street up again. And by having a signal there, people do stop and they see that for a long way away. And so especially with a speed hump, you want to know well in advance that there is a crosswalk there. And I know from in Holland where people, my family members were kind of heavy on the pedal. And one time I was getting a ride from my brother, and all of a sudden he slowed right down, and there was no signs, no indication of anything going to happen. But I said, "Why are you slowing down?" He says, "Watch this." They went over the speed hump, and the whole intersection of this street was a speed hump, and it slowed everybody down. Everybody felt safe. I think it's perhaps long overdue that we do something serious. We talk about it a lot. We hear that sometimes. We talk about slowing down. There's got to be some enforcement. But I think there also has to be some design in the road, which Mr. Weir always talks about. You have to design the road so people will actually slow down. That will certainly slow people down, but they also need a fair warning. Thank you.
That's what I'm thinking. Councillor Walker's amendment sort of fits the bill. We can actually put in some with pedestrian crossing signals and some without, like this and/or. So it gives you guys more options to pursue possibly one or two more because it'd be significantly cheaper. So.
And I'm sure, Mr. Your Worship, that they will think about that too. I don't have the whole list of wherever that may be possible. They may have some more ideas, but it's just to get the conversation going that we want to do something similar to what Lansville has done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
And I do understand where Councillor Walker is coming from, because I think there's going to be an aspect of scalability with all the financial difficulties we're dealing with here. There's only going to be so much we can actually do without pulling money away from the maintenance of core infrastructure, which is basically why local governments exist at the end of the day, is the meat and potatoes work. So I think the conversation is going to happen either way. I'm not particularly wedded to it. I'm glad Councillor Walker raised the issue because I think it is an important issue to consider. But I'm quite certain that Mr. Bob Weir, our town's engineer, will have a lot to say about both aspects of those options. And hopefully when we see those documents from staff, if it comes back to us at the future date, the costs of each portion will be noted, so we can have a discussion about which intersections we address and how much it will cost to address them with the different options.
I can assure you he's banging his head on his desk as we speak. There's no doubt about that. But I agree with everything he said. Just be certain, Councillor Westbrook, that when it comes back to council from the committee, that we have looked at everything. And Councillor Walker brought up a good idea, and as long as that's going to the committee, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. We can look at that for sure.
Very good.
Just so I'm clear, then am I making that a friendly amendment to Councillor Westbrook's motion?
We need to discuss all these options. Thank you.
Okay.
So and/or a friendly amendment. You okay with that, Mr. Filmer? I think you seconded that. Good. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Staff reports. Heather, you're up.
I'll move those.
I'm sorry, I just need to clarify, there has been a change since the agenda was run. Elizabeth Thompson did report back to the Chamber of Commerce on the safety plan for Moonlight Madness, and the committee has now requested that they're not going to be able to do the event as they had originally planned. And so the modification to it is to close the street on and hold based on the guidelines on Thursday, November 19th and Friday, November the 20th from 5 to 9 p.m. So the resolution would be that council directs staff to work with the Chamber of Commerce to host the 2020 Moonlight Madness shopping event, adhering to all provincial health guidelines on Thursday, November 19th and Friday, December the 20th from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And the second, okay.
Yep. The second one?
The second one is that council authorizes the closure of 2nd Avenue between Memorial Avenue and Primrose Street on Thursday, November 19th and Friday, November the 20th from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., ensuring that all requirements are met, including emergency services notifications, traffic control, insurance, litter and notification to businesses affected by the closure.
Roll it in. Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second
Councillor
both.
Walker, you're still moving both?
Sure.
Yep.
Second both as
Councillor
amended.
Harrison. Discussion? Councillor Harrison.
So yeah, just to follow up, we did have a conversation with some downtown businesses who were looking for a more ambitious plan for road closures. There's a lot of debate around that in the downtown business community. And it's good to see that energy and that excitement to get some new ideas on how to get more people walking around our downtown, visiting more than just one store and walking around the downtown. That'll be a great conversation to have as we move forward. There's even a conversation which, speaking of Bob banging his head on the desk, is about making 2nd Avenue one way for a period of time. So I think there's a lot of good ideas that these folks are bringing up. I link them to websites for some of the things that Montreal does, because I think Montreal is one of the best cities in Canada for having art and culture on the streets and getting people out and engaged. Obviously, we don't have Montreal's resources, but there's a lot of good conversations that are happening with the Chamber and with downtown businesses about how to create a more vibrant downtown.
That's great news. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Just a question through the chair to staff. When we start talking about adhering to provincial health guidelines, how is that going to be ensured that we are? Because I mean, this event can get very large very fast. I just want to talk about enforcement for a while or for a bit, because I think that's my one worry. I want to see this event go ahead. I want to make sure that we are following everything to the dot. But with everyone going into small shops and closed quarters, I just want to make sure that we are.
So there won't be enforcement by the town for the individual events. The application through Island Health goes from the Chamber of Commerce. So they're given the clear guidelines from Island Health as to what they can and can't do. And that's where the items that they were requesting have now been, they've been denied. So no caroling, no hot chocolate, none of the things they were planning to do are permitted. So it's literally just a shopping event where the street is closed just to give the extra space for the people. So it'll be up to the stores to adhere to whether they can have 4 people in the store at a time or 6 people in the store. It won't be us monitoring that. It'll be up to each individual store owner.
Very good. I can't guarantee that I won't be caroling as I'm walking down the street. Just to be. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. Planning, Mr. Sales.
I'll move the public hearing thing.
Second.
Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Into the Woods Child Care Facility.
Yes, thank you. I think this one warrants a presentation. So, Ms. Gould, if you could please pull it up. So this next agenda item relates to an ongoing project to establish a new childcare facility in the community park. And so this report provides a bit of the history and process that the staff and the working group have gone through to select this site. So just a bit of history. Earlier this year, the town was awarded funding to create a new early learning studio. This included almost $2 million in provincial funding through 2 different programs. These monies will help create 37 new spaces for children aged 3 to 7 or 3 to kindergarten in this Into the Woods early learning studio. And the anticipated opening date is 2021, later 2021. So early discussions and the town identified the general location of this project, which is to be the community park. So then a working group was established to start to refine the location and discuss different options. So in the memo, you'll see that this working group has included an architect, Chief Michael Warkama from Qualicum First Nation, Councillor Adam Walker, representatives from QBQs, School District 69, City of Parksville, and along with town staff and several other community members. The group first reviewed a number of sites that had been identified early in the process as potential candidates for the childcare facility within the community park. So it started off with 8 possibilities. That 8 number quickly blossomed into quite a number of possible sites. The architect then took us through a very interesting process where we reviewed each of those sites and scored them in relation to specific criteria that are important for operation and establishment of a childcare facility. Everything from ownership and tenure to tree retention. Tree retention was a very important one. Traffic impacts, noise, impact on neighborhood, climate, seismic aspects, parents, drop off, circulation. each of these criteria was given a score by all the members that participated. And then from that, a few candidate sites quickly emerged as probably the most viable. So Ms. Gould, if you could just advance to the next slide. So the sites that emerged as the most viable kind of focused around the west side of the community park, focused around the parking lot that most people would think of as near the BMX track. So this is just north of the upper playing fields. It's not a heavily used site, except of course when there's tournaments and such, and then it is heavily used. And so there were 4 sites that were reviewed right around that parking lot. And with each of these, the architect did a detailed design exploration to see, really how feasible each one of them was, what the impact would be on the surrounding neighborhood, the trees, and so on and so forth. So I'd like to just hone in for a minute on the leading candidate, which is the recommendation from the architect and also from the working group. Next slide. So the slide before you is the proposed site of this childcare facility. Once again, it's in that parking lot area. This particular location is on the north side of that parking lot. The building and associated play yards to either side would essentially straddle an area that's partially on the parking lot and partially extended into those trees that are currently between the parking lot and Dorset Road. One of the advantages of this site is that it has good solar exposure from the south side. So when children play outside, it's important for both the comfort as they play and also for the people working there to have good solar exposure. There's a variety of conditions on the site. So if you're in the play yard on the east side, you're likely to be warmer in the morning. On the west side, you'll get the afternoon sun, but there's a lot of different climates that the workers can take the children to depending on the outside conditions. The proposed circulation route that we're exploring right now is one where parents could come in off Dorset Road, go through a one-way road that would then go down through the parking lot. They could then leave via Park Road, which is the established access right now. Creates a really clean pickup and drop-off circulation route. It also allows for the creation of more parking to compensate for the parking that's being removed through the placement of this building on this location. So in total, I'd just say that after reviewing this site in relation to all the other possibilities, it came out significantly ahead. It's an excellent site, meets almost all these criteria very well. And it'll be a good fit for the community park. It's compatible with the adjacent uses. It'll blend well with the neighbors. Then the circulation route should have a minimal impact, and the staff recommendation is that this be identified as the site, and that we will then move forward with the detailed design and construction process. The one condition there that I think council will be pleased to see is that there is still a design process underway. So if council does advance with this motion, that doesn't mean that this is the last council or the public would see it. The idea here is that council gives the initial green light to this site. The architect then goes forward and develops detailed plans. So before actually starting construction on this site, council would have a chance to review the plans again and make refinements as needed. But the recommendation as of now is to move forward with this site. Thank you.
I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you very much, Luke. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Mr. Sales for all of his hard work on this. This I know wasn't something that he was expecting to be on his roster during this term, and he's picked it up well and worked with some very creative people as he tries to wrangle this process through. So it's very much appreciated.
Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. So I just want to echo that too. I know there's been a lot of work that staff's doing because we're basically doing this as a town. My only question is, one of the things, the conversations that we were having in the report is that we're trying to get proximity for services, because if it's clearly much more reasonable economically to have two buildings as opposed to one joint field house / daycare, fine, that's great. I'm just looking at some of the site locations, like, to my untrained eye, what do I know about this? Seems to me like option like number 5, where it's sort of to the right of the document. Would that be closer for services? And then subsequently, if we're extending services from this building to the daycare, should we be successful? Would that reduce the cost of that grant application?
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Harrison. Certainly, there are locations that would be slightly more efficient in terms of services. So, but at the same time, so those sites were compromises from the perspective of an ideal childcare location or perhaps the field house location. So the field house that we've been considering, if you're looking at the preferred option, which is site option 13 in your package 13.3, the field house would essentially end up going down near the bottom of that diagram in that treed area, which is between the parking lot and the upper fields. That's the proposed kind of ideal location for that field house. What that location does is it does capitalize on the route of services. So for example, the water line would likely come in from Dorset Road through that new parking area. So we would be bringing services close to the proximity of the field house. Similarly, sanitary sewer would need to be extended, other services as well. This option was a bit of a compromise. So there would be ways to put the buildings closer together, but I think you would end up compromising the quality of the field house and also compromising the quality of the childcare location. So this is sort of the recommendation as a sweet spot somewhere between those two scenarios.
Good discussion, gentlemen. Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Luke?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Weiss. So the next item is a development permit application for foreshore protection at 363 Judges Row. So this has been reviewed by engineering and planning staff in relation to the waterfront master plan development criteria. It's essentially would reestablish what we would call as a natural shoreline approach. It raises the elevation at the top, the top side, but it does establish a gentle slope. Next slide. Oh, and there's not a diagram here. So apologies, you'll have to refer to your package, which does have more detailed information. But for those people who don't have the package in front of you, you would note that it's about a 5-to-1 gentle slope down to the foreshore, which is roughly mimics what you would see naturally in that location. As an example of what this might look like when it's done, there was a green shore protection that was also done on Judges Row recently. It was done last year. And at the conclusion of work, you would hardly have known that they had done any work at all. You know, it just blends in. The only difference is that when you're up at the upper bench where the small residential lots are, the elevation is slightly higher. So the recommendation is to authorize issuance of this development permit. Thank you.
I'll move that.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Filmer. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen.
Your Worship, if I could ask a question through staff. Along that Judges Row area, further down towards the end of Judges Row, we own a strip of land that currently seems to be taken up by property owners that live across from Judges Row, and they have their little picnic area, whatever you want to call it. But the town owns a piece of that. I think it's about 3 houses back from the end of Judges Row, and it could be somewhere between 13 or 18 feet. And I don't want to get that lost. So perhaps through you, I could ask staff to come up with a draft of what it actually looks like. So people know who live there or who walk there that that's actually a town asset. Thank you.
I understand where this is coming from. Councillor Westbrook, it was something that was brought up, I think some time ago, was some fences being put on or whatever it was. Can't remember exactly. I'm not sure that was the best place for it, but I definitely agree that we should look into that. Should we make that into a motion? I think that's an encroachment that we were dealing with there.
Yes, thank you. So I would make a motion. Unfortunately, I don't know the exact address, but I think staff know. Mr. Virsch would probably know too. It's about the third house back from the Judges Row, below College Inn, College Heights, where we own a strip of property that goes from the road to the beach.
It's 357 Burnham Road.
357, thank you. So if we could have that, so everybody knows that that's public property, not somebody's private property. Thank you.
Very good. Finance, Mr. Marsh.
I think there was a motion, there was somewhere a motion in there to ask staff to bring forward.
Look at that one. Discussion, I'm sorry, gentlemen, discussion?
I'll second it if nobody did.
All in favor? Thank you. Passed unanimously. John, you're up.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, this time.
Good. Thank you. I've figured out Zoom. Well, this is great. The asset management report, and asset management in particular, is somewhat similar to the brief budget discussions there were, in that there's a lot of details there, and there's information that needs to be discussed. It's probably better not to get into the details right now, because I don't think we could do justice to all the details that relate to asset management in an hour, never mind a couple of minutes for an update. What's important in the report is that there's a staff recommendation to provide council with, to report on and schedule appropriate council updates. And the items that were included in the asset management in the proposed resolution is detailed 10-year capital, reserve policy, debt strategies, which was talked about earlier, level of service documents, and summary asset management plans for each asset group. I'd like to briefly say something on the asset management plan for each asset group. That, to do that thoroughly and proper, is going to take a lot of time, hundreds and hundreds of hours. That needs to be done in some sort of summary manner to get it on and approved by council, because what staff are told is to be able to get various government grants in the future, you're going to have asset management plans for these specific groups. So what we'll likely have to do is prepare those documents with a very good effort in a summary way, and then improve them over the next year or two. But anyways, there's a staff recommendation on the within the report. We're recommending that council pass that, and staff, Arnold, I believe, is here on the call, as am I, and we'd be happy to answer any questions, but I still feel that it's best in a separate meeting.
I'll move the recommendation.
Second, and I'd like to ask a question.
Discussion, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mary's. On the list it talks about debt strategies, and we talked earlier about how to pay for renewal of infrastructure. Is it the overall strategy? Because I thought it was that the overall strategy would lead us to a situation where we would have a way to cover the cost of renewal of our infrastructure. To Mr. Marsh, thank you.
I'm not sure I understood that in relation to debt and removal. I didn't really understand that. For example, on debt, I could say it depends on which asset group. For example, sanitary sewer, we're in good shape for probably another 70 years. But what happens 70 years from now when we have to replace 75% of our sewer system? So there's different mechanisms for the different asset groups. So I don't think it'll be one approach fits all scenarios, which is partly why there's various 5 bullet points on the recommendation. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Well, it certainly starts the conversation, and I agree that it will take a lot of more detail. But I've always felt that, and this is a broad statement, that we hear about the national infrastructure deficit, our national debt, our provincial debt. I don't want the town to leave to future generations a debt that they owe, they own, to look after the infrastructure that is here. I think we need to be responsible and build up reserves and come up with pay schedules like we passed today about the fees for water and sewer so that it pays for itself. It's great to get grants, and we've been successful. When we built that $3 million water reservoir, we were kind of struggling how to cover that, and we got, I believe, about a $2 million grant. So there are grant opportunities. But I think we also have to look at replacing our pipes. We have significant problems, or we've had significant problems in the Eagle Crest area where we had blow-ups. And instead of waiting for something to break, we need to be able to track what condition these pipes are in. And I think staff is doing a good job on that, and replace them before we have those problems. Thank you.
Further discussion?
If I could comment, I had my hand up. I couldn't have said that any better. I couldn't have said that any better. I now understand what the initial question was, and that's exactly why we need to pass a resolution similar to what we have there, and we need to start working towards documenting these approaches and getting proper financial planning in place so that we don't saddle our future with infrastructure deficit issues. That being said, I don't want to sound too doom and gloom here. Every community in Canada, and if not the Western world and other parts of the world, are dealing with these infrastructure issues. So our residents will hear about that now because we've put it on the council agenda. Most communities haven't even got to this state yet. And I think it's good that we're starting to have the conversations.
Thank you very much, John. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Just a question through the chair to staff. How are we doing with the $50,000 grant from FCM? I know in the package it just says it's currently being reviewed. I've also been trying to pay close attention to that application. Have we heard anything back from FCM, or do we know when they're supposed to be rolling those out?
Yes, last week FCM got back to us, and we have to respond to them by November, well, early next week. So this week, Arnold is working on a reply to their submission now. They had various questions. So we've hit the first level of review, and to advance it to the second level of review, we have various questions to answer. I don't know if Arnold was serious on this, but he told me that we had too many verbs in the initial application. So I think it'll be relatively easy for us to make the adjustments that they're looking for.
Further discussion, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. So in this discussion that Councillor Westbrook started here with ensuring that we're funding future liabilities through the chair to staff, would it make sense to take one infrastructure class like water infrastructure and break that out into an annual rate and actually start through the process of funding that depreciation?
Well, we're trying to do that with buildings through this grant application with the FCM, but certainly that's what we need to do on those asset management plans and the summary ones to get to the point where we can tick the box on these FCM grant applications that we have asset management plans in place, therefore we're eligible for the grant. So we really need to do it on more than just one. We need to do it on several of them. We've done a lot of work, the background work, to put these plans together. Our information is reasonably good, except in the storm sewer area and storm sewer. So we are addressing that. I don't know that we need a council resolution other than what we've proposed.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mary. It's not all as doom and gloom as maybe people think. About 20 years ago, we started to increase taxes by 1%, and that's why we have inflation plus 1%, and we've done that for a long time. And that is to pay for the replacement of our equipment. It is to build and maintain roads. We've got one for buildings. We've got right now that money goes towards our payment to the fire hall. But when that's done, it will be probably $400,000 and pretty soon $500,000 a year. When that fire hall is paid off, we had a discussion at the time that we would take that down again after we completed paying the fire hall. And I made the case back then that we shouldn't expect that. I think we need to build up a reserve to replace the buildings that we have. And that's why we have this 1% increase for roads, for paving, for equipment, fire hall equipment. And so these 1% tax increases will be over 20% now, will actually put us in fairly good stead to start following the strategy of looking after our infrastructure.
Councillor Harrison, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So first, I want to say a thank you to staff. Some of these numbers that we see on a page is just one number on a page, but there's dozens and sometimes even maybe hundreds of hours of work that went into getting that number on a page. So I know a lot of staff throughout our organization have been working very hard to prepare this document. So there's more work to be done, but I'm very grateful for the work that has been done. One thing I'd also highlight is that building codes change. So say, for example, the standards for earthquakes that schools have to deal with. As you become compliant with an updated building code in the future, there might be more significant demands. So planning ahead to have some money set aside is a very necessary thing to do. But at the same time, while there will be probably slightly more costs than we might be able to foresee, at the same time, this is unfurling over 50, 70 years sometimes. So dollar amounts that sound massive and gigantic now, when you stretch it over 50 to 100 years, it's less daunting. So I think that there's a lot of good information here. But I just suggest that for us right now, it's more steady as we go. We're a little bit further ahead than a lot of other smaller communities. And this is a vital component of being responsible long-term fiscally.
Councillor Walker.
What I'm hearing all sounds great, but it's completely ignoring the numbers. If you refer to page 163 on your agenda, it says in the next 10 to 20 years, or ideally in the next 10 to 20 years, there's 25 kilometers of pipe in the town of Qualicum Beach that needs replacing. And they say the cost per meter is between $500 and $1,000 per meter. So if you take 25,000 meters and multiplied by the halfway between, you're talking about $18 million. And if we're talking about replacing that in the next 15 years, the $400,000 a year we're setting aside for the fire hall is not anywhere near adequate. You need to set aside $1.2 million a year if we're serious about setting that aside and repairing that in 15 years from now. So it's all fine to say we're working towards it, but the longer we wait before we start putting money into reserves, the bigger the hit's going to be when we get to that point.
Councillor Westbrook.
Also, thank you, Maryse. When I talked about the 5% for the fire hall, as the taxes go up, that pretty soon will be about, by the time it's finished, 500,000 a year. That's for buildings. That's not to replace water lines. That's for buildings. We have the same for our equipment. We have the same for roads. We have these 5% increases on top of what we had in the budget at the time, added to it. So it's an addition. It's not to be played around with. That's what it is for. And so for water lines, we've been very successful in also getting grants for infrastructure replacement. So I think for us to worry about it too much at this point, I think it's unreasonable. It's throwing a lot of dark clouds over what we're doing. When I started here 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk. How could we ever build the ring roads and these water reservoir and do Memorial Avenue? It's impossible. We can, and we are, and it's being paid for with no debt. Thank you.
Councillor Philip.
Thank you. I think, we're going into a good discussion, and off of what Mr. Marsh has said, we're going to go into a separate type of meeting to discuss this.
Yeah.
I do agree with what Councillor Walker is saying, though, is, when we start looking at numbers like that, it is scary, especially for generations to come. I think it is, I understand that there's grants and we can be successful in grants, but if we're looking at communities, across the country that are, at the same time as us are going to be going through something like this, quite advantageous of us to say, oh, well, we'll get grants for that, because we can't bet on that. And if we don't get a grant, our people are on the hook for those types of payments. So I think it is very advantageous to say, oh, well, we'll get grants to make those types of repairs. That's not our responsibility. Isn't to say we'll get grants. Our responsibility is to make sure we budget appropriately and have finances set aside. So I do look forward to having this discussion further when Mr. Marsh brings it to the next meeting.
Yes, I think conversations moving forward would be good. I think there's some confusion still on what this looks like. I'm not going to get into that now. So let's move this ahead. We'll have some discussions, good discussions moving ahead, and make some decisions that are good for our community. So with that, gentlemen, I'll call the question. All those in favor? passed unanimously. Thank you. Arnold, welcome. I'm not sure I've had you speak at a meeting yet, or are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Your Worship. I've never had the pleasure recently, but I will. We've put a policy in front of council, and I just want to point out a few things before we move ahead with this. So, based on our strategic plan, one of the goals is better policy tools to guide operational practices. That's really sort of the guiding point behind this. And unfortunately, we are a litigious society, and we're not immune from all the things that are happening out there. Most municipalities kind of have gone through this process because of events from 20 some odd years ago. So, we also have a duty of care as landowners. And we currently don't have any sort of policy in place like this. We do some of these things. We have reasons for doing them already. But what we're really looking at here is more of a structured, repeatable, documented approach that we can use. And I want to make very clear that this does not preclude us from creating a larger vegetation plan. This includes best management practices already for forest management to mitigate these types of situations. And this would complement a forest management type of procedure or policy that we'd be looking for in the future. This policy also references a service level. So one of the things we hope to address here was a situation we ran into before where we possibly had a competing level of service and a competing policy. So what we're looking at is kind of a new structure, and we want the ability to maybe adapt and expand those services within the bounds of the policy, and with an easier ability to bring these back to council when we want to change something like that. We've also looked at more of an industry standard approach. So we are using the International Society of Arboriculture's level 1, 2, and 3 processes because they are already established, they are accepted. So on that note, we have a few options in front of you, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Conversation. So we'll move the staff recommendation and we go from there. Councillor Harrison.
The staff recommendation.
Thank you. Second. Councillor Westbrook. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
I threw the chair to staff. The policy, page 242, the second paragraph that describes the policy, it says this policy is to ensure that the town will conduct regular inspections of trees on town-owned lands and identify any trees that may be deemed hazardous. My concern with language like that, and this is sort of the question, is does that open up any liability for the town? We're saying that we will adjudicate all the trees in town, and if something does fall over and we haven't adjudicated it, are we in a situation where we're not following our own policy and creating more liability than already exists?
Through the chair, it's a good question. We have the same issue with our sidewalk inspection policy and other things like that. Moving a policy forward like this is more for us to say we are doing inspections, we are following a process. In past litigation in other municipalities, I think what's happened is as long as you have a policy and you adhere to what that policy is, we're not saying we're going to catch every tree in town. We are saying we yearly will do visual inspections to see what we can find. That I don't disagree that maybe there are some questions that may arise after we do an inspection, but our sort of due diligence is to say, if we see a storm or yearly, we will look at the trees in town.
I would say actually that any form of best effort is better than doing nothing. So I think we know there's trees out there, we're not doing anything. I think any legal discourse, I think would, if we, we made a best effort to find them, and you're going to miss them, I guarantee it. So, Councillor Harrison.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that I'm pretty sure the standard here would be one of reasonableness, and did we reasonably make a good effort to try? As long as we have follow up with staff in accordance with our policy, as long as we're not breaching the terms of our policy, I think that's where we might get into trouble in a court case in the future. Is if we said we will do X guaranteed, that just says we're going to be doing some inspections. Doesn't say every tree will be inspected by the date 2023. So I think that we'd be okay, but it is a fair concern to raise.
Councillor Philbert, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. I guess I might be the only one here. It's a good policy. It's written well. I understand where we're trying to go here. I'm not in favor of adopting the policy today. My reasoning for that is right now we're currently working on a tree and vegetation management plan. It's in the draft form. It's been bounced back and forth from staff. It's gone to my committee now twice, and we're still working on that. And that policy or that bylaw, that plan that we're going to bring forward, if this policy is going to basically marry an image that draft bylaw, I'm not understanding. I assume the policy is just so we can have something short term, so that when the bylaw comes in place, we have something. I spoke to a couple residents and they're confused as to why we're going this route instead of, not having that draft form come back from staff and then come to council. Council still has not seen and fully discussed that bylaw in a meeting. It's still sitting in a committee. The committee's just about done with it, but it's because it's been pushed back and forth from draft to draft. So I'm not in favor. It's a good policy, but I'm not in favor of adopting the policy right now because I'd like to see that bylaw come and the draft come to council before we do this.
Sorry, guys, the alarm in the building's going off and
It's just because somebody moved.
I think someone's left the room and set off the alarm. So just want to hang tough for a sec, Robert. No disrespect, just I know there's doors opening and closing, people running, so you aren't getting your due attention.
We're done.
Alarm's off. Sorry about that, Councillor Filmer, go ahead.
That's right. I don't really want to restart that. We'll just have to watch the recording afterwards. You guys can see what I said. Essentially, I just want that draft bylaw to come forward. I don't agree with doing it this way of doing a policy. I don't want this policy to be a tree removal policy, and that's essentially what I'm seeing it as right now. If we're doing a vegetation management plan, that's what a vegetation management plan is. So that's where I sit right now. Thank you.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mary. I understand what Councillor Film is getting at, but it's like us having a plan to get sidewalks. This is about inspection. And similar as someone mentioned, the bylaw inspection procedure and policies are vital for us to have a defense if something goes wrong. Now, one time we did inspections, but we lost track of when they were done. This is a long time ago. And because we couldn't produce the fact that we had the inspection, the town was liable. So this inspection is, in my opinion, completely separate from a tree management bylaw. This is about a safety aspect to it. I commend staff for being proactive because this type of policies are strongly recommended by the Municipal Insurance Association to prevent loss of life, but also financial losses to the town. Thank you.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I understand that it's about safety and inspection, but I don't understand why something like this could not be included when that draft vegetation management plan comes to council and we start looking at, this is what we do when a tree has had its course. This is when vegetation is getting dangerous. I don't understand why that cannot be in the vegetation management plan when it comes to us. It's great having a policy, but it's just, in my mind, it's just creating more documents, and that's what I'm seeing this as. So I understand where we're going. It's great policy. Staff did a great job writing it. I just don't support the way we're going. That's just where I stand.
I think they're saying is probably, I think the tree vegetation management plan is still a ways away from approval. It's still sitting with your committee. We haven't seen it yet. This is a fix that, the last windstorm, again, we saw numerous trees come down overpass and in community forest, the heritage forest. We do have to address this sooner than later. Councillor Harrison.
I was just going to say briefly that I think we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's a more fleshed out plan we could have for vegetation, certainly, but I think this is a necessary gap that we do need to address for liability issues. So I think it's reasonable to advance this now. I think it's well researched. They have a lot of good sources of information, which if I had spare time, I would probably look into more. But I think this is a good start, and I think that doesn't preclude the other conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. And then I will call a question.
Building on what I said before and hearing from Councillor Westbrook and Harrison about liability, I really don't think the language in here protects our town. When we say that we are going to conduct regular inspections of the trees on town-owned land, that includes every boulevard, every park, every laneway. You know, if a tree comes down in a laneway and we have a policy that says we're going to inspect the trees, we don't go through those laneways. There's nothing in this policy that refers to the process when somebody is complaining that they think there's an at-risk tree. There's considerable staff time, I'm presuming, from some of the conversations I've had, from some individuals who feel their tree next door is an issue. They refer it to staff, and it's a whole back and forth. And so this policy should also address that type of a process. So I really do appreciate the impetus for this. That windstorm showed us how vulnerable we are to nature and how trees can affect us. But I think that this policy does require some further refinements. I don't know what's happening with committee of the wholes. This would be a perfect thing to refer to a committee of the whole for a more fulsome discussion. I guess I'll make that referral, but through the chair to, or I guess to the chair, what's happening with committee of the wholes? We haven't had any of those since March, and I'm just wondering why that is.
I don't think that's part of this question, so we'll have this discussion after. Let's get back to, it says here, inspections will be conducted in areas of concern annually, which I don't think includes anyways. I think that opens up different options. Inspections will be conducted in areas of concern annually. Regularly established schedule after a significant weather event, etc. So I don't think they're saying we're going to inspect every single laneway or every I see your hand, thank you. Every single piece of our property would be impossible. We'd have to have a team of arborists doing that. But areas of concern annually, I think addresses that concern. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, so the challenge with areas of concern is a resident who has a laneway behind their home may find it concerning, whereas that may not fit. And we haven't really defined what that looks like. And elsewhere in the policy, we say we're going to do this regularly. So I'll move that council refers this to a future committee of the whole.
Seconded by Councillor Fillmore. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
I guess question for the chair. We have not had a committee of the whole since March. I'm not sure if there's any reason for that, but I think this would be a perfect opportunity to do that. We have a very fixed topic, and we've got some really smart people in our community that would like to have input on something like this. So this policy isn't necessarily about trying to protect every tree in town. It's about trying to find that balance and bringing in some people who are more versed in this type of industry than I am personally, I think would provide significant value. So I strongly encourage this type of a meeting.
Councillor Harris.
Sorry, I forgot about the mute button. I would just say that when I was looking through the report, it's clear that they're referring to international standards and international organizations which regulate this. And as such, while I appreciate the contributions of individual citizens, in a court of law, they won't say, was it a knowledgeable guy you talked to? They'll say, did you follow the appropriate procedures and protocols that are put in place? So I think we're on a more solid footing for this. For a broader discussion of a much broader tree management plan, I think that'd be more appropriate to have that broader discussion. And just on a grammar point, fulsome means foul. Just
to answer your question, Councillor Walker, about committee of the whole, is actually I'm not 100% sure of that answer. I know why we started not having them, and I know we're backed up, so this conversation wouldn't happen until sometime next year anyway, with committee of the whole discussions. So that's something I will address with staff moving forward. Back to the motion, further conversation. Councillor Walker.
I do recognize, I don't know what you said about fulsome, but we can talk about that after. I do recognize that there are many in our community that will have opinions, but maybe not a professional background in this. But there are some in our community who are incredibly knowledgeable with this, and just having the time to reflect, I think, is also a value for something like this.
Okay, we got moved and seconded for committee of the whole. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's at this time, gentlemen, until we can figure out with staff what's going on. Back to the main motion. Council approve the hazardous tree inspection procedure bylaw. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, not yet.
Sorry, no, motion to close.
Review of comments from the public it's a done deal. What I'd like to do now, Jim, is I need to have a 15-minute discussion with staff regarding what's going on next. I don't want people driving to town if we don't have to. So motion to recess until 6:30.
Okay,
I need a seconder for that.
second.
Do we need 15 minutes for that, Mr. Mayor Reese?
Yes, I do. We're all over the building, so I just being a little leeway. So give me 15 minutes. Saves you driving to town, Councillor Feldman.
Should
Okay.
we not all be a part of that conversation? I'm not sure.
Review of recess, 15 minutes, 6:30, gentlemen. Hey, Scott, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. My understanding is Councillor Walker's on his way already.
Okay.
Councillor Westbrook.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
can hear you.
Okay. I'm in favor in going into recess, into
Motion to
camera.
close.
Go in camera to close, yes.
Seconded, Councillor Harrison.
Motion to close.
Thank you. All in favor?
Thank you.
Gentlemen, we're closed. I'll meet you downstairs.